Chapter 1698. Eyeball. The moment the restriction on the tombstone was undone, Zhuowen immediately entered the tombstone restriction and disappeared from where he stood. At this moment, the masked man stepped into the tombstone. Just as he was about to chase after Zhuowen, the tombstone under the tombstone suddenly split open. A huge hand reached out from the tombstone and grabbed the masked man's feet. A restriction? The man with the ghost face mask did not panic. His eyes emitted a sword will that soared to the heavens. The giant hand that was grabbing his feet completely collapsed under his gaze that was filled with sword will. However, Zhuowen was delayed by the huge hand for a moment. He managed to pull away from the masked man. These are just small tricks. You still can't escape. The man with the devil mask smiled coldly. He stepped on the void with his right foot, and his entire body turned into a sword. He broke through the layers of the void and swept towards Zhuowen in an instant. The distance between the two of them was immediately shortened. Zhuowen's gaze grew colder. As he fled, he used the devouring curse restriction to continuously use the restrictions on the road to obstruct the masked man. However, it was a pity that the masked man was too strong. Not a single restriction was able to trap the masked man. The restriction was only able to make the masked man's figure pause for a moment. Cold sweat started to flow incessantly from Zhuowen's forehead while his gaze was filled with gloominess. He originally thought that the restrictions here would be able to stop the masked man. Yet he noticed that it was all in vain. Just like this, the two of them chased and fled again. They quickly approached the seven-colored vortex in the center of the continent. Behind the seven-colored vortex, a round eyeball could be vaguely seen. This eyeball was similar to an ordinary person's eye. The pupil was pitch black and 90% of the eye was white. Through the gaps of the seven-colored vortex, the eyeball suddenly noticed Zhuowen, who was constantly fleeing. Its pupils shrank in an extremely human-like manner. It actually showed a rare trace of dependence and doubt. At this moment, Zhuowen was only 100 meters away from the seven-colored vortex. He could even feel that the surrounding space was faintly distorted. This distorted space was caused by the seven-colored vortex. In this distorted space, Zhuowen's speed suddenly slowed down. However, the masked man chasing behind him was not affected at all. Whoosh! Soon, the masked man quickly caught up to Zhuowen. He bent his right wrist and the long sword flashed with a dazzling cold light in the air. It slashed towards Zhuowen's waist. A chill suddenly rushed from Zhuowen's feet to the top of Zhuowen's head, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily tremble. Zhuowen gritted his teeth and summoned the Green Dragon Palace again. It was like a huge mountain. The masked man's eyes exploded with coldness. The long sword in his right hand sped up and instantly cut through the void. He said coldly, "Immortal technique heaven slashing." The sword cut through the void and once again slashed out a sky-breaking sword chi. It hit the surface of the Green Dragon Palace. Then Zhuowen groaned. His right hand pressed against the surface of the Green Dragon Palace. He retreated continuously until he stopped more than 10 meters away from the seven-colored vortex. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Ding ding ding. The man with the ghost face mask took advantage of the opportunity to pursue and attack. He took a step forward and slashed out 3 times in a row. The 3 sword lights swept over and bombarded the top of the Azure Dragon Hall. It actually separated the Azure Dragon Hall. And the man with the ghost face mask took advantage of the gap when the Azure Dragon Hall was separated to stab with his sword, aiming for Zhuowen's vital point. The tip of the sword emitted a powerful milky white sword light. Zhuowen's pupils constricted as he stared at the incoming sword light. He wanted to retreat, but the sword light's powerful chi locked onto him, leaving him no time to dodge. Zhuowen summoned the 1st and 9th Yang Dao swords. At the same time, he used the devouring curse to its limit. However, all of his actions were useless against the powerful sword light. Almost all of his attacks were blocked by the sword light. He was unable to stop the powerful sword light. At that moment, Zhuowen felt an unprecedented sense of danger. The shadow of death completely enveloped him. "Zhuowen, leave this to me and the fox. This person is too strong. Only the two of us can take action." Xiao He sighed gently in his sea of consciousness. Origin energy began to boil within him while Cheng Huang held the Fushi cauldron. He was ready to attack as well. The two of them could sense that Zhuowen was in danger. If they did not take action, Zhuowen might die. Once Zhuowen died, the two of them would be finished as well. As a result, they were forced to take action. Even if they had to exhaust their origin energy, they had to protect Zhuowen. However, just as Xiao He and Cheng Huang were about to take action, a sharp black bolt of lightning suddenly shot over. It shot out from behind Zhuowen and slammed into the sword light. Crackle! Crackle! The moment the black bolt of lightning struck the sword light, countless strands of black lightning rapidly spread across the entire sword light. Afterwards, the sword light directly dispersed under the entanglement of the strands of lightning. The moment the sword light dispersed, the masked man's eyes narrowed to the size of needles. He stared fixedly at the black bolt of lightning. His originally calm eyes finally revealed an intense change. The black bolt of lightning was extremely sharp. After devouring the sword light, it was completely unharmed. It directly shot towards the masked man, causing the air to crackle as it passed by. The masked man hurriedly retreated. He wielded his sword in his right hand and swung it again and again. Strands of sword light gathered into a huge crescent-shaped sword light that instantly slammed into the black bolt of lightning. Rumble. The sword light erupted with dazzling light the moment it collided with the black bolt of lightning. It actually managed to block the bolt of lightning. However, the sword light did not last for very long before it collapsed. The black bolt of lightning shot out once more. It was like a specter in the night. Although it seemed slightly dim, it was still as sharp as before. The masked man's eyes were filled with graveness. He retreated once more, retreating several tens of thousands of meters away. He wielded his sword in his right hand as he formed a seal with his left hand and suddenly pressed it against the blade. Immortal technique, chaotic sword cutting the sky. As he spoke, the masked man quickly swung his sword 9 times. 9 strands of sword chi descended from the void in a chaotic manner and crashed into the black bolt of lightning. Bang! 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 9 strands of sword chi superimposed on one another. Their power actually underwent a qualitative change. When they collided with the black bolt of lightning, countless continuous roars resounded, causing the entire fragment to quake. The space within a few thousand meters suddenly turned into a black hole. Looking at this scene, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with shock. At the same time, he was extremely puzzled. Where did the black bolt of lightning come from? Moreover, it seemed that the black bolt of lightning was helping him. Thinking of this, Zhuowen could not help but turn around. Then his eyes were fixed on the colorful vortex. In the colorful vortex, he saw a round eyeball looking at Zhuowen with confusion and attachment. This made Zhuowen involuntarily take a few steps back. What is this? Zhuowen whispered with a grave look. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the whole fragment shook even more violently. Even Zhuowen staggered a little. The fierce black bolt of lightning was finally annihilated under the bombardment of the 9 strands of sword chi. The masked man, on the other hand, was filled with a murderous aura. He rushed out from the dust with a long sword in his hand and his hair dancing in the wind. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. The moment he was about to take a defensive posture, the eyeball behind him showed a trace of displeasure. Immediately, 3 black bolts of lightning flashed out of the eyeball's pupil. These 3 black bolts of lightning were exactly the same as the previous one. The aura they revealed was not much weaker than the previous one. The black bolt of lightning was released by this eyeball. Zhuowen could not help but exclaim in surprise. He stared at the eyeball behind him with bright eyes. Perhaps because it had completely released 3 black bolts of lightning, the eyeball seemed a little tired. On the other hand, the expression of the person with the ghost face mask, who had rushed over, changed drastically the instant the 3 black lightning bolts rushed over. Without even thinking, he immediately turned around and fled. The black lightning just now had forced him to use his strongest immortal technique, the chaotic sword severing the heavens. Now that 3 black lightning bolts had burst out at the same time, it was not something he could resist at all. Therefore, he decisively gave up on chasing Zhuowen and chose to flee. The person with the ghost face mask was extremely fast, and he quickly disappeared from the boundary of the fragment continent. The 3 black lightning bolts stopped the moment they reached the edge of the fragment continent. With a hiss, they returned to the eyeball one after another. At this moment, the eyeball slowly turned around. Its dark pupils were facing Zhuowen. Zhuowen could not help but take a few steps back. His scalp was numb. If this eyeball could force the masked man to retreat, then it would be easy for this eyeball to kill him. Therefore, before he knew the purpose of this eyeball, Zhuowen did not dare to move at will. Just as Zhuowen was secretly afraid of this eyeball, it narrowed its eyes and let out a cheerful hiss. It swept around Zhuowen and lingered around Zhuowen. It seemed to be very happy. What's going on? This eyeball. Looking at the strange behavior of the eyeball, Zhuowen was surprised. Then the eyeball fell on the back of Zhuowen's hand and intimately touched the back of his hand. Immediately, it gave Zhuowen a human-like look toward the colorful vortex in front of him, as if urging Zhuowen to enter the colorful vortex. This eyeball wants me to enter the colorful vortex? Zhuowen frowned slightly, but his heart was hesitant. The colorful vortex did not look simple. He did not know if he would be in danger if he entered. However, the eyeball in front of him could force the man with the ghost face mask to retreat, and the power of the black lightning was too great, which made him very afraid. If he did not follow the instructions of the eyeball, he did not know if it would bring about a fatal disaster. Boy, go in and take a look. This eyeball does not look malicious. If it wants to kill you, it will be easy. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in Zhuowen's mind. Chapter 1699. Immortal Qi. What a rich energy this is. The moment Zhuowen entered the seven-colored vortex, he felt an extremely rich energy rush towards him. He only took a small breath and felt his whole body become refreshed and warm. Pust, pust, pust. The eyeball instantly arrived in front of Zhuowen. It looked around and finally fell on Zhuowen, as if it was trying to tell Zhuowen something. Zhuowen looked around and found that the surroundings were filled with milky white light. The inside of the light was oval, as if Zhuowen was inside a round egg. Moreover, the inside was filled with milky white gas. This gas was extremely rich and had turned into a white fog, making it difficult for people to see the specific environment and scenery around them. Zhuowen gradually breathed in the milky white gas around him, and a hint of joy appeared in his eyes. The energy contained in this milky white gas was extremely mysterious. As soon as it entered his body, it flowed through his meridians and into his dantian, forming a powerful saint energy. Moreover, the saint energy formed by this milky white gas gathering in his dantian was much stronger and more resilient than ordinary saint energy. Moreover, from the eyeball's actions just now, Zhuowen could vaguely guess that this eyeball wanted him to absorb the milky white gas inside. This is immortal qi. I didn't expect that this seven-colored vortex actually contains immortal qi. Xiao Hei couldn't help but exclaim in his sea of consciousness. Her expression was full of excitement. Immortal qi? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and asked doubtfully. Xiao Hei was still in a state of excitement. After calming down with great difficulty, she slowly explained the immortal qi to Zhuowen. In ancient times, the reason why martial arts were so prosperous was actually inseparable from this immortal qi. In that era, what existed in the air was not the current yuan qi, but this so-called immortal qi. This immortal qi was many times more advanced than yuan qi. It was precisely because of the existence of immortal qi that there were so many capable people in ancient times. There were even deities. In that era, the limitations of immortal techniques were not so great. Even profound sages and heavenly sages could rely on immortal qi to perform immortal techniques. That era was the best era for martial artists. However, after the catastrophe, the continent was broken apart, and the immortal qi degenerated into yuan qi. Because of this, martial arts had also degenerated for countless years. At this point, Xiao Hei, immortal qi, even if your cultivation hasn't reached immortal sage realm, and immortal qi Xiao Hei, immortal qi, even if your cultivation realm, immortal realm. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed when he heard that. He stared fixedly at the surrounding immortal qi and said, "No wonder I felt warm and extremely comfortable after absorbing the immortal qi in the surroundings. So this is immortal qi from the ancient times." However, after the catastrophe, didn't the immortal qi degenerate? Why is there still immortal qi here? Moreover, the immortal qi here is extremely rich. I'm afraid that such rich immortal qi is extremely rare even in ancient times. Speaking of this, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a hint of doubt. Obviously, he did not understand why there was still immortal qi here, and what was the origin of this eyeball. The black lightning that was spitting out from this eyeball was very powerful. It was actually able to force the person with the ghost mask to not dare to fight back at all. He directly turned around and fled. It was really shocking. All these doubts remained in Zhuowen's heart, causing him to ponder deeply and be puzzled. Finally, he looked at Xiaohe. In his sea of consciousness, Xiaohe spread out her hands and smiled bitterly. You don't have to look at me. I don't know what's going on either. The battlefield I was in back then was only the tip of the iceberg. Coupled with the fact that my strength was limited, I was unable to come into contact with the battle at the highest level. It's useless for you to ask me. Zhuowen sighed gently. He knew that Xiaohe really did not know. It seemed that there were many mysteries surrounding the catastrophe back then. However, he also knew that as his strength continued to increase, the truth of the catastrophe would gradually come to light. Right now, what Zhuowen needed was to continuously increase his strength. Only those who were powerful had the right to know the ancient secrets. Since there's immortal qi here, I might as well cultivate here. With that, Zhuowen sat down with his legs crossed, and began to use the immortal qi here to cultivate. When the eyeball that hovered nearby saw Zhuowen sitting down to cultivate, its eyes were filled with joy. Just as Zhuowen entered the seven-colored whirlpool to cultivate, the man with the ghost face mask slowly appeared in the void thousands of miles away from the fragment. At that moment, the man with the ghost face mask was in a rather sorry state. The three black lightning bolts were very powerful. If he had not escaped the fragment in time, and the black lightning bolts could not leave the fragment, he would have been in imminent danger. The man with the ghost face mask's eyes flickered. In the end, he did not choose to leave. Instead, he chose a fragment near the seven-colored whirlpool and hollowed it out with a sword. Then, he sank into the depths of the fragment and began to wait silently. He knew that Zhuowen could not stay in the seven-colored whirlpool forever. There would be a day when he would come out. The day when Zhuowen came out, he would be able to completely capture Zhuowen. After all, he had always followed orders. If he could not complete the mission, he would not return. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, 2 years had passed. In these 2 years, the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan had kept a very low profile. However, even though the two great clans kept a very low profile, there were more and more rumors about Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei disappearing in the Shattered Nightmare Abyss for 2 years. However, the most widespread rumor was that Lei Qingtian, the head of the Thunder branch of the Wind and Thunder clan, and Jiang Zuomei, the head of the Ice and Fire clan, had both died in the Shattered Nightmare Abyss with Zhuowen. In the face of such rumors, the two clans maintained a rare silence and did not come forward to defend themselves. The silence of the two clans caused the rumors to spread even more widely and had a tendency to become more and more intense. On the other hand, Zhuowen's name had thoroughly spread throughout the central region. Although everyone knew that Zhuowen would most likely die in the Shattered Nightmare Abyss, it was absolutely worth it to have two earthly immortals accompany him to the grave. On this day, two figures stood quietly at the edge of the cliff of the Shattered Nightmare Abyss. The strange thing was that the two figures were rather strange. Although they stood at the edge of the cliff, their auras were faintly discernible. If one did not look carefully, they would be treated as air. One of them was a middle-aged man with long, flowing hair that fluttered in the wind. He gave off a free and unrestrained aura, while the other was an old man with white hair and a youthful complexion. He was dressed in an amber-white arcanist robe, and he seemed to be in high spirits. The two stood quietly like this. Finally, the old man spoke. "Divine Lord, that existence's head should be in the deepest part of the Shattered Nightmare Abyss. If I'm not wrong, that existence's body should have been dismembered and left in one of the 6 danger zones. The thing here is the head." The middle-aged man pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "I really didn't expect that such an existence would be dismembered. The person who was called the strongest person on the heavenly armor continent back then is indeed extraordinary. The strongest person is indeed extraordinary. After all, That person has been plotting for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if his cultivation is not as high as that existence's, his intelligence and scheming are the best in the world. Even that existence was tricked. The title of the strongest person is not baseless. The old man sighed softly. A rare look of admiration appeared in his eyes. Obviously, the old man was quite convinced of the so-called strongest person on the heavenly armor continent. Even if he was the strongest person, even if he had been plotting for hundreds of thousands of years, so what? In the end, he still couldn't break free from his shackles. In the face of absolute power, he still fell. However, the powerful existence he plotted against didn't die. It was just dismembered. The middle-aged man called the Divine Lord sneered and said arrogantly. The old man bowed slightly and didn't say much. However, his eyes revealed a trace of disapproval. It's all in the past. Let's not talk about it. Now let's enter the shattered nightmare abyss and explore. If we can really find that existence's head, then it will be much easier for us to gather the other parts. The old man shook his head. The middle-aged man nodded. Soon after, he lifted his right foot and an enormous force emanated from the bottom of his foot. This force was too terrifying. With a single step, the terrifying black wind at the bottom of the abyss was completely annihilated, revealing the bottomless abyss below. If someone were to witness this scene, they would definitely be shocked and their hearts would beat wildly. The terror of the black wind in the shattered nightmare abyss was well known in the central mainland. Even earthly immortals wouldn't dare to enter the black wind at will. However, this man only lifted his foot and took a step. Just like that, the black wind that plagued countless warriors in the central mainland was temporarily annihilated. Let's go. The middle-aged man's eyes were calm, as if he had just done a very ordinary thing. Immediately, he took a step and plunged directly into the depths of the shattered nightmare abyss. His speed was as fast as lightning. Wherever he passed, countless hissing sounds of the wind resounded. The old man pondered for a moment. With a wave of his sleeve, surging mind power lingered around his body. Immediately, he chased after the middle-aged man at an extremely fast speed. Not long after the two entered the shattered nightmare abyss, the black wind that had disappeared above the abyss gradually reappeared. It was dense and looked particularly terrifying. In the depths of the shattered nightmare abyss, in the space of the fragment continent to the east of the seven-colored vortex, Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes. His aura was growing stronger and stronger. Chapter 1700. Heaven-defying sacred realm. Over the past 2 years, immortal qi had been constantly nourishing Zhuowen's meridians and acupoints, allowing Zhuowen's cultivation to reach the peak of the sky sacred realm. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. Taking a deep breath, he opened his meridians and began to frantically absorb the immortal qi around him. Although he had been constantly absorbing immortal qi over the past 2 years, he had basically used it to temper himself instead of immediately absorbing immortal qi to raise his cultivation. He knew very well that he had just reached the sky sacred realm not long ago, so his foundation was not very stable. If he immediately absorbed immortal qi to raise his cultivation, not only would it not be beneficial to him, but it would also bring great hidden dangers. Therefore, over the past 2 years, Zhuowen had been using immortal qi to temper his foundation. This was just like laying a foundation. As long as the foundation was deep enough, the building he built on it would be extremely stable and would not fall. Although 2 years was a short period of time, with immortal qi, which was a surging energy that far surpassed yuan qi, the efficiency of polishing his foundation was much faster than usual. These 2 years were enough for him to completely stabilize his Sky Saint realm. This was also why Zhuowen dared to break through to the Sky Sacred realm now, and was not afraid of any hidden dangers. The immortal qi kept pouring into Zhuowen's acupoints, followed the countless meridians in Zhuowen's body, and rushed into his dantian. Zhuowen's aura also grew stronger as the immortal qi poured into his body. The moment his aura reached its peak, Zhuowen was stunned and frowned slightly. With the influx of immortal qi, the moment he tried to break through the barrier of the heaven-defying saint stage, he actually felt an extremely strong resistance, preventing Zhuowen from taking the final step of the breakthrough. I've been accumulating immortal qi for 2 years, but I still can't break through to the heaven-defying sacred realm. Zhuowen sighed softly. He also knew that he had broken through too quickly. It was too unrealistic for him to directly jump from the early stage of the Sky Sacred Realm to the heaven-defying Sacred Realm in 2 years. After all, ordinary Empyrean Saint stage saints would need to accumulate for hundreds or thousands of years before attempting to break through to the heaven-defying saint stage. However, Zhuowen only needed 2 years. Although Zhuowen's progress was indeed fast with the help of the divine qi, 2 years was too short. If Zhuowen accumulated the divine qi for more than 10 years, he might be able to smoothly break through to the heaven-defying saint realm. Just as Zhuowen sighed and was about to withdraw the immortal qi that was entering his body, the eyeball that was floating not far away and had been watching Zhuowen all this time suddenly screeched and flew over. Instantly, all the immortal qi in the entire space gathered in the eyeball. In an instant, the space that was originally filled with immortal qi changed drastically. There was no longer any immortal qi in the surroundings, and the eyeball swept in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen stared at the eyeball, and suddenly realized that there was a 7-colored vortex in the pupil of the eyeball. Then, the 7-colored vortex suddenly swept out, and floated above Zhuowen's Tianling acupoint. Clatter! The moment the 7-colored vortex floated above Zhuowen's Tianling acupoint, a huge amount of immortal qi condensed into a rotating column of qi and poured into Zhuowen's Tianling acupoint. In an instant, as the purer immortal qi poured into Zhuowen's body, the aura in Zhuowen's body surged and became much stronger. The strong resistance that had been preventing Zhuowen from breaking through to the heaven-defying saint realm showed signs of loosening under the infusion of the pure immortal qi. As time passed, an hour later, the immortal qi that gushed out of the 7-colored vortex underwent a qualitative change. In an instant, it became much larger and broke through the resistance of breaking through to the heaven-defying saint realm. Sizzle! 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 At this instant, Zhuowen's long hair and clothes fluttered even though there was no wind. Moreover, the bearing he emanated seemed completely different, and the aura on his body was many times stronger than before. The formless qi turned into ring-shaped ripples that filled the entire space, and an ear-piercing hissing sound rang out. It was as if the air was being torn apart at all times. I've reached the heaven-defying saint realm. Zhuowen's eyes could not hide his excitement, but soon his attention fell on the eyeball in front of him. He did not understand why the eyeball had helped him so many times. The person who had released the black lightning to help him drive away the grimace mask was now pouring all the immortal qi here into his body to help him smoothly break through to the heaven-defying saint realm. Perhaps it had noticed Zhuowen's gaze. The eyeball hissed and rushed to Zhuowen. It rubbed the back of Zhuowen's hand intimately like a docile kitten. This eyeball is sticking to you, but its origin is unknown. Boy, what are you going to do with it? Xiaohei asked in a low voice. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. This eyeball has no malice towards me, and the black lightning on it is extremely powerful. Perhaps it will be of great help to me. I plan to take it with me. Xiaohei fell silent, and then said in a low voice, "This thing comes from the core of the shattered elephant abyss. Its origin is strange, and the 7-colored vortex is even more unpredictable. If you plan to take it with you, you have to be careful at all times." Zhuowen's face turned serious, and a thoughtful look appeared in his eyes. Then he nodded and said, "I will pay attention to this." With that, Zhuowen took out a crystal from his ribs and opened it, indicating for the eyeball to enter it. The eyeball, however, shook its eyeball like a human. Soon after, it burrowed into Zhuowen's clothes and rested comfortably in one of his pockets. Seeing that the eyeball was unwilling to enter the storage crystal, Zhuowen did not force it. He put away the storage crystal, patted the eyeball, and then looked at the entrance of the 7-colored vortex. Based on the character of the man with the ghost face mask, I'm afraid he will not give up. I'm afraid he is still waiting for me outside. But now that I have 2 earthly immortal realm primordial spirits and this eyeball, I may not be afraid of the man with the ghost face mask. Now is the best time to go out. With that, Zhuowen took a step forward and walked out of the 7-colored whirlpool. He landed on the eastern fragment. Walking out of the 7-colored vortex, Zhuowen's eyes quickly fell on the other 3 7-colored vortexes on the other 3 continents, as well as the huge 7-colored vortex surrounded by the other 4 continents. There is such rich divine qi in this 7-colored vortex. I wonder if the other 3 vortexes and the huge main vortex are the same? Zhuowen stared at the other 7-colored vortexes and murmured in a low voice. However, as soon as Zhuowen finished speaking, the eyeball lying in his arms suddenly hissed and floated in front of Zhuowen. The eyeball revealed a dignified and frightened look, and it shook its head like a human. Do you mean that I shouldn't enter the other 7-colored vortexes? Are there dangers in the other 7-colored vortexes? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that the eyeball was suddenly so nervous. He was afraid that the other 7-colored vortexes were dangerous places. The eyeball nodded its head in a very human-like manner, indicating that it agreed with Zhuowen. Is that so? Zhuowen frowned slightly and glanced at the other 7-colored vortexes. He always felt that there was something strange about this place. Moreover, the eyeball's behavior made him very puzzled. If it weren't for the fact that the eyeball had saved him and showed no hostility, Zhuowen wouldn't have believed it. Whoosh! Just as Zhuowen was pondering, the sound of something breaking through the air suddenly swept over. Immediately, the man with the ghost face mask rushed over, holding a long sword in his hand. Like an arrow leaving the bowstring, he rushed over in an instant. His speed was extremely fast, and in an instant, he was dozens of meters in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen slowly raised his head and stared at the man with the ghost face mask who was rushing over. A mocking smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The moment the man with the ghost face mask rushed over, the eyeball suddenly crossed in front of Zhuowen, and a fierce black lightning flashed out of its pitch-black pupil. The black lightning cut through the air, and immediately arrived in front of the man with the ghost face mask with a rumbling sound. The moment he saw the black lightning, the man with the ghost face mask's pupils shrank to the size of needles. He hurriedly stopped his figure that was rushing over. He raised the sword in his right hand and swung it upwards. A terrifying sword chi soared into the sky and stood on top of the black lightning. Bang! 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 Unfortunately, the moment the sword chi came into contact with the black lightning, it immediately emitted a series of crisp sounds. Then, the sword chi was completely swallowed up by the black lightning. The man with the ghost face mask stepped on the ground and retreated, wanting to avoid the black lightning. However, the moment he retreated, an incomparably huge hull suddenly appeared behind him and smashed down fiercely. The face of the man with the ghost face mask changed slightly. He swung his right hand and slashed out with his sword, blocking the Azure Dragon Palace. However, after being delayed by the Azure Dragon Palace, the black lightning immediately caught up. The man with the ghost face mask had no choice but to use the heaven-slashing chaotic sword again. However, this time, the 9 sword chis he sent out were no longer attacks. Instead, they surrounded his body and formed a layer of powerful sword chi defense. Pitter-patter. The sound of firecrackers rang out. Countless black electric threads, like innumerable small snakes, surrounded the 9 sword chis and constantly and slowly wore down the defense of the 9 sword chis. The killing intent in Zhuowen's eyes grew stronger. The man with the ghost face mask was extremely mysterious and had targeted him many times. If he let the man with the ghost face mask escape like this, Zhuowen was really unwilling. It seems that the only way to completely kill the man with the ghost face mask is to use the primordial spirit self-explosion. Zhuowen flicked his finger and took out a primordial spirit sealed by countless spells from the spirit ring. This primordial spirit was Lei Qingtian's primordial spirit. The primordial spirit self-explosion was Zhuowen's most powerful and terrifying trump card. Moreover, it was only a one-time use. After using it once, it could not be used again. Its power was very terrifying, but at the same time, it could not be used again. Therefore, Zhuowen did not intend to use it unless it was really a critical moment. However, Zhuowen did not want to let go of the man with the ghost face mask in front of him. Moreover, Zhuowen also wanted to find out who the man with the ghost face mask was. Therefore, he resolutely took out a primordial spirit. Zhuowen made a gesture with his right hand and suddenly touched the surface of the primordial spirit. Then his right hand grabbed the primordial spirit and threw it towards the man with the ghost face mask. Chapter 1701. Primordial Spirit Explosion Whoosh. At this moment, The primordial spirit was like a bomb that could explode at any time. The aura that was brewing on its surface became more and more terrifying. When the primordial spirit arrived in front of the man with the ghost mask, its terrifying aura reached its peak. At this moment, the man with the ghost mask was holding a sword in his right hand. With the help of the 9 powerful sword keys, he was constantly offsetting the strange black lightning on the surface of the primordial spirit. When the black lightning was about to be annihilated by him, his expression changed greatly. He stared at the primordial spirit that was approaching him. A strong sense of crisis brewed in his mind. This sense of crisis was so strong that it made the man with the ghost mask's heart beat wildly. A strong sense of fear arose in his heart. Primordial spirit, of an earthly immortal? The man with the ghost mask naturally saw the true face of the primordial spirit. The fear in his heart reached its peak. He screamed and retreated rapidly. He did not expect that Zhuowen would take out the primordial spirit of an earthly immortal. Although he knew that Jiang Zuomei was killed by Zhuowen, and her primordial spirit was taken away, he never expected that this boy could control the primordial spirit to self-explode. Generally speaking, it was very difficult to control the primordial spirit to self-explode. Basically, it required the strength of an earthly immortal. However, this boy had not reached the earthly immortal level yet, but he could control the primordial spirit to self-explode. This was really incredible. The aura of the primordial spirit was getting stronger and stronger, revealing a terrifying sense of destruction. It was clearly a sign that it was about to explode. Retreat quickly. The man with the ghost mask retreated rapidly without hesitation. Unfortunately, Zhuowen would not let him succeed. However, the moment the primordial spirit was within 100 meters of the man, Zhuowen immediately detonated the primordial spirit with a thought. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, the sound of continuous explosions resounded in the void. Then, clusters of extremely terrifying explosions came one after another and spread out, covering an area of hundreds of thousands of feet. Such a huge explosion caused Zhuowen to continuously retreat until he was out of the range of the explosion. Only then did he look at the world-destroying explosion with shock in his eyes. I didn't expect that the explosion of the primordial spirit would produce such a terrifying force. This force should be enough to blast an earth immortal to death, right? Zhuowen was deeply shocked by the power of the explosion. He knew very well that if he, Zhuowen, was at the center of the explosion, he would definitely die. The power of the explosion was terrifying. The entire shattered nightmare abyss seemed to shake because of it, and the nearest rainbow vortex and 4 continents were also enveloped by the explosion. However, what made Zhuowen cautious was that the 7-colored vortex was like an incomparably hard iron stone. It radiated outwards and enveloped the 4 continents. The instant the explosion spread over, it did not move at all, and was not affected by the explosion at all. The explosion lasted for half an incense stick of time. Finally, it slowly disappeared. Soon after, it revealed the mess within 100,000 feet in front of them. Apart from the 4 continents enveloped by the 7-colored vortex, all the fragments within the range of a few 100,000 meters had been shattered into pieces. However, before the explosion, Zhuowen had already stored the fragment with the transmission array in the Azure Dragon Palace and the Spirit Ring space in advance. Zhuowen looked over and immediately noticed that not far away from the explosion, there was an enormous sword-shaped phantom that was a few 100 meters in size quietly floating in the air. In the shadow of the sword, the man with the ghost mask was curled up with a pale face. At this moment, the surface of the shadow of the sword began to be filled with countless cracks, and the cracks grew more and more. In the end, it collapsed with a loud bang. The man with the ghost mask who was curled up inside suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was extremely pale, and the long sword in his hand also collapsed into nothingness. The man with the ghost mask stared at Zhuowen. He wanted to speak, but he spat out another mouthful of blood and directly fainted. Whoosh! Zhuowen instantly rushed to the front of the man with the ghost mask. The eyeball followed closely beside him. At the same time, Zhuowen set up powerful defensive measures around his body, just in case. Zhuowen formed a seal with his right hand, and sharp spikes grew out of the fingertips formed by the slaughtering finger of the netherworld. He suddenly and silently stabbed at the neck of the man with the devil mask. However, the moment the slaughtering finger was about to penetrate the neck of the man with the ghost mask, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and stopped the movement of his right finger. Forget it, let's see who this person is first. It won't be too late to kill him later. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He slowly withdrew the slaughtering finger, stretched out his right hand, and lifted the ghost mask on the man's face. A pale and rather handsome young man's face suddenly appeared in front of Zhuowen. The man's eyes were closed, and cold sweat was dripping down his forehead, as if he was having a nightmare. When Zhuowen's eyes fell on the man's face, he could not help but be stunned. His pupils shrank to the size of needles, and he gasped and said, "It's him? How is it possible? How can he advance so quickly? It's only been a little more than 10 years." At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were full of confusion, doubt and inexplicable shock. "Zhuowen, let's go. I feel two extremely powerful auras approaching quickly. These two auras are very terrifying, far surpassing that of an earthly immortal. If we are discovered by these two people, you and I won't be able to leave." Suddenly, Xiao He in the Sea of Consciousness exclaimed, her voice full of shock. Zhuowen was startled. He hadn't noticed the two powerful auras at all. However, he knew that Xiao He's divine sense was much stronger than his divine sense. Xiao He was usually able to sense things that were further away than him. "Let's go." Zhuowen didn't waste any time. With a wave of his sleeve, the devouring curse seal continuously shot out and immediately sealed the person with the ghost mask. After putting the ghost mask into the Azure Dragon Hall, Zhuowen took out the fragment with the teleportation array in the hall. After entering the fragment, Zhuowen quickly found the transmission formation, hidden in the deepest part of the fragment under the guidance of Xiao He. Without thinking, he activated the devouring curse without hesitation. At this moment, in the void hundreds of thousands of miles away, the middle-aged man and the old man were slowly shuttling through countless fragments. There's a big commotion in the Broken Fang Abyss. There seems to be a great battle in the deepest part of the Broken Fang Abyss. Let's hurry over and take a look. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. The space in front of him suddenly distorted, and he disappeared along with the distortion. The movement technique used by the middle-aged man at this moment was extraordinary. It was much faster than the teleportation of an earthly immortal. If anyone saw the middle-aged man's movement technique, they would definitely cry out in surprise. This was because the movement technique used by the middle-aged man was not teleportation, but teleportation above teleportation. The speed of this teleportation was many times faster than teleportation. Teleportation allowed one to travel to any location within 10,000 miles in an instant. Teleportation above teleportation allowed one to travel 100,000 miles in an instant. Its speed was 10 times faster than teleportation. As for those who were able to teleport, only those whose cultivation base was at the heavenly immortal realm and above could master it. The old man looked at the middle-aged man who had teleported away with a touch of envy in his eyes. He said, "There are so many benefits to being a celestial saint realm expert. This old man is really envious of the ability to teleport and teleport." Having said that, the old man waved his sleeve. Immediately, a sparkling and translucent crystal floated above the old man's palm. Then the old man squeezed it. Immediately, endless energy gushed out from the crystal and formed an invisible vortex. The old man took a step forward and immediately entered the vortex, disappearing on the spot. In just a few breaths' time, the middle-aged man and the old man both arrived at the core of the shattered nightmare abyss. Their gazes first fell on the seven-colored vortex, and the corners of their mouths curled up. However, their gazes soon fell on Zhuowen, who was in the debris not far away. At this moment, Zhuowen had already activated the teleportation array. Perhaps sensing something, he immediately turned his head to look in the direction of the middle-aged man and the old man. The moment his gaze fell on them, it was as if countless bombs had exploded in his mind. The noise was so loud that Zhuowen's ears buzzed. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, which was filled with the smell of blood. This is too terrifying. Who are these two people? At this moment, Zhuowen's heart was beating wildly. Without thinking, He immediately lifted his right foot and stepped into the array. However, the moment he stepped into the array, the middle-aged man's eyes narrowed. An extremely powerful white light burst out from his eyes. With just one look, endless majesty and pressure erupted. It was as if countless mountains were crushing down on Zhuowen's body. Zhuowen's body stiffened and he couldn't move. This person is too terrifying. He froze me in place with just one look. Zhuowen groaned inwardly. He didn't expect that two such terrifying experts would suddenly appear in the shattered nightmare abyss. His heart was filled with bitterness. The middle-aged man looked down at Zhuowen indifferently and said, "It's really strange that a little guy of the heaven-defying saint stage can still survive in the shattered nightmare abyss." The old man next to him opened and closed his nose. His eyes flashing, he said, "If I'm not mistaken, the explosion just now was the self-destruction of the primordial spirit of an earth immortal. How strange. Why would an earth immortal be willing to self-destruct?" Self-destruction of an earth immortal? The middle-aged man looked surprised. Apparently, he was also surprised by the self-destruction of an earth immortal. After all, those who could cultivate to the earth immortal realm were basically brilliant people who had experienced countless years of cultivation to reach the level of an earth immortal. If it wasn't a moment of life and death, an earth immortal wouldn't risk his primordial spirit not to self-destruct. After all, after the primordial spirit self-destructed, it wouldn't enter the reincarnation cycle, and would completely disappear from the world. The price to pay was great. But now, the earth immortal had self-destructed. There was no doubt that someone had forced the earth immortal into a moment of life and death. Chapter 1702. Myriad Elephant Ceiling Formation. Zhuowen's forehead was covered in cold sweat. The pressure from the sudden appearance of the middle-aged man and the old man was far too great. The pressure far exceeded that of Lei Qingtian, Jiang Zuomei, and the man with the devil mask. Even Feng Lei Wuji and Jiang Binghan were slightly weaker than the two of them. Just what kind of existences are these two? They're actually exerting such a terrifying pressure on me. Zhuowen knew the situation was bad. Although he wanted to struggle with all his might, he sadly discovered that he couldn't move at all. The middle-aged man's gaze was like the might of heaven, firmly suppressing him. What Zhuowen didn't notice was that the eyeball in his arms was like a dead fish the moment the middle-aged man and the old man appeared. It lay motionless in Zhuowen's arms, and even its aura had completely vanished. The middle-aged man and the old man's attention clearly wasn't completely focused on Zhuowen. They only casually glanced at Zhuowen before looking at the core of the rainbow vortex. That existence's head should be stored in this rainbow vortex. This rainbow vortex should be a seal laid down by the strongest person on the heavenly armor continent, Songjia. This seal isn't simple, the middle-aged man said indifferently. As soon as the middle-aged man said that, Zhuowen, who was standing in front of the teleportation formation, noticed that Xiaohe in his sea of consciousness trembled, as if she had heard something extremely shocking. Zhuowen was surprised. He couldn't help but ask Xiaohe, "Xiaohe, what's wrong?" Xiaohe hovered in the air in his sea of consciousness. Her gaze was filled with complicated emotions, while Cheng Huang's carefree expression had vanished. It was replaced with an extremely solemn expression. Xiaohe fell silent for a while. In the end, she sighed softly and said, "Nothing. I was just distracted for a moment." Cheng Huang, who hovered beside Xiaohe, originally wanted to say something, but a glare from Xiaohe silenced him. Zhuowen naturally noticed Xiaohe and Cheng Huang's expressions. He originally wanted to continue asking, but Xiaohe interrupted him. "Kid, you still have the time to think about such unimportant things? You should be thinking about how to break free from the suppression on you right now." Zhuowen smiled bitterly when he heard that. This person is too strong. Just the might contained in a single glance is enough to make me tremble. I'm unable to move. How am I supposed to break free? Xiaohe and Cheng Huang exchanged glances. Xiaohe and Cheng Huang. Xiaohe and Cheng Huang's glare. Xiaohe and Cheng Huang looked. Huang and Huang. Are Xiaohe and Huang were. Hey studio Cheng and Huang glare Chen were was studio in was studio were was. Once you break free from the suppression, Immediately leave through the teleportation formation. Don't hesitate at all. Zhuowen nodded solemnly. He raised his head to look at the middle-aged man and old man. Sure enough, he noticed that the middle-aged man and old man did not pay any attention to him. Or perhaps they had completely ignored Zhuowen. If we work together, we might be able to break free from the seal, said the old man. The middle-aged man nodded and said, however, I hope Elder Gu can set up the myriad sealing grand formation before we break open the seal. That way, we can prevent the existence sealed within from seizing the opportunity to escape once the seal is broken open. Elder Gu nodded and said, you're right, Divine Master. I'll begin setting up the universal sealing formation right now. As he spoke, Elder Gu leaped up and instantly arrived above the seven-colored vortex. He slowly extended his emaciated right hand and suddenly pulled. Immediately, terrifying mental energy surged out. This mental energy was extremely powerful. It was like a boundless sea whistling over. Elder Gu's hands pointed at the void and suddenly formed a seal. Instantly, the spiritual sea turned into an invisible restriction. The range of the restriction was extremely large. It actually enveloped the seven-colored vortex and the four fragments. It was an extremely large area. Elder Gu's mental energy was able to envelop such a large area with it. Just how powerful was his mental energy? Although Zhuowen had just become a profound Saint Master and cultivated the myriad evolution scripture, his mental energy was extremely powerful. However, he could only radiate less than a quarter of the area of the four fragments. The difference between him and the old man was like heaven and earth. He's a Saint Master? Zhuowen stared at Elder Gu. His body trembled. It was as if thousands of bolts of lightning were exploding in his mind, causing Zhuowen's mind to go blank. Chen Shui, Zhuowen muttered in a low voice. His eyes suddenly shone with an unprecedented light. Back then, Xiaohe had said that it was possible for a Saint Master to completely awaken Mu Qinshui. And this old man before him was a ready-made Saint Master. Zhuowen knew that this was an opportunity. He's actually a Saint Master. In other words, these two people are from the Primal Chaos Temple? Xiaohe's gaze passed through the heavy fog and finally landed on Elder Gu and the middle-aged man. Her eyes were filled with deep thought. At this moment, after Elder Gu set up the last restriction, he suddenly waved his sleeve. Instantly, the enormous restriction below him seemed to have a chain reaction. And it actually started to gather together. In the end, a myriad of illusions appeared on the surface of the restriction. The thousands of illusions contained endless suffering. If an ordinary person looked at it, they would probably lose their mind and end their own life. In addition to the endless illusions, the myriad creation sealing array also had an extremely powerful defense. It wasn't a problem at all to trap a heavenly immortal. Even a true immortal would have to weigh his own strength if he wanted to break through this defense. After he laid down the myriad creation sealing array, Elder Gu stomped his right foot, causing the thousands of illusions in the surroundings to instantly vanish and reveal the seven-colored vortex seal once more. Old Man Gu nodded at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man understood and took a step forward. He laughed and said, this time, with the help of the ancient all-encompassing sealing formation, subduing that head shouldn't be a problem. As he spoke, the middle-aged man clenched his right hand before curling his finger. The clouds in the horizon crushed down and actually formed an enormous finger that was over 10 kilometers long. The markings on the surface of the finger were extremely clear, and it seemed like a real person's finger. Starfall finger. The middle-aged man let out a low roar. He bent his finger and pointed downwards. Instantly, the finger descended like a huge mountain. The moment the finger descended, countless starlight swirled around the finger. It looked dazzling, as if it wasn't a finger that was descending, but a sky full of stars. Zhuowen stared at the descending starfall finger, and his expression changed slightly. He could sense the extremely terrifying energy contained within the starfall finger. Before this energy, Zhuowen seemed so insignificant. In the end, the starfall finger blasted onto the seven-colored vortex and erupted with endless starlight. The starlight was like clusters of nebulae that revolved around the vortex. Its might was even greater than before. Terrifying explosions resounded from the seven-colored vortex. The 4 fragments surrounding the 7-colored vortex trembled violently. Then countless cracks began to appear on the surface of the 4 fragments. Moreover, the cracks rapidly spread until they finally collapsed into nothingness. At that moment, the 4 fragments had disappeared. Only the huge 7-colored vortex and the 4 300-meter-long 7-colored vortexes that were attached to it remained. "Old Gu, help me break the last seal," the middle-aged man roared. Old Gu's gaze was solemn. He took a step forward and instantly formed dozens of seals with his right hand. Then, red formations appeared before him. As Old Gu continuously formed hand seals, more and more red formations appeared before him. When the number of red formations reached several thousand, Old Gu's eyes shone with sharpness. "1,000 formation image." Old Gu rushed to the middle-aged man's side and pointed with his right hand. Immediately, the seal formed by thousands of red formations was pointed out and landed on the 7-colored vortex. However, the moment the red seal landed on the 7-colored vortex, it immediately erupted with thousands of red formation shadows. In an instant, it completely enveloped the 7-colored vortex and the 4 smaller ones within it. In an instant, the explosions around the 7-colored vortex became even more violent. Then, cracks began to appear on the surface of the 7-colored vortex. Seeing the cracks, Old Gu and the middle-aged man's eyes were filled with excitement. Soon after, their attacks became even more violent. At that moment, the entire shattered nightmare abyss began to shake violently. The shaking was not localized but spread throughout the entire abyss. If someone stood outside the shattered nightmare abyss, they would clearly feel that the area within hundreds of thousands of miles around the abyss began to shake violently. It was as if a violent earthquake had occurred. The surrounding creatures fled at the sound of it, not daring to stay in the slightest. In the depths of the shattered nightmare abyss, as the middle-aged man and Old Gu worked together, the cracks on the surface of the 7-colored vortex began to spread. In the end, the 7-colored vortex began to completely collapse. The moment the 7-colored vortex collapsed, an extremely terrifying and powerful aura erupted from within. This aura was so terrifying that it seemed to be able to crush the world. Following the eruption of this terrifying aura, an extremely fast black shadow actually flew out from the collapsing 7-colored vortex. This black shadow was very fast. In an instant, it fled in the opposite direction of the middle-aged man and Old Gu. Its speed was even faster than teleportation. This caused the middle-aged man and Old Gu's pupils to shrink. Bang! However, the black shadow didn't manage to escape far before it crashed into the edge of the All-Creation Sealing Array. Immediately, it activated the All-Creation Sealing Array. The All-Creation Sealing Array was extremely powerful. When the black shadow slammed into the edge of the array, it immediately became dizzy and saw stars. It stopped its escape. As soon as the black shadow stopped, its true appearance was finally revealed. Zhuowen was surprised to find that the black shadow that escaped from the 7-colored vortex was actually a head. Chapter 1703. The second eye. Moreover, Zhuowen also discovered that this head with fluttering white hair had a single eye. Its right eye was tightly shut, and under its eyelid, there was a bloody scar that streaked across its cheek, giving it a rather ferocious appearance. Zhuowen stared at the head's tightly shut right eye. He could not help but glance at the eyeball that was playing dead in his arms, and he came to a sudden realization. He guessed that the eyeball was very likely the head's missing right eye. However, he was puzzled. Why did the right eye not return to the head but follow him, Zhuowen? Although he was filled with doubts, Zhuowen naturally could not pull out the eyeball at such a crucial moment. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the one-eyed head, the middle-aged man, or the old man, they were all extremely terrifying existences. The 3 of them only needed to pinch their fingers to kill him. He would not bring about his own death by taking out the eyeball. Moreover, the eyeball in his arms was currently playing dead. Its aura had completely vanished. It probably did not want to be found by the head. Who are the 2 of you? How dare you set up a restriction to prevent me from leaving? The head slowly turned its head. Its white hair fluttered without any wind. Its aura was like a mountain rising from the ground. It suddenly erupted, causing even the sky and earth to change color. Haha! The two of us are the benefactors who broke the seal of the rainbow whirlpool and released you. Is this how you treat your benefactors? The middle-aged man's gaze was indifferent, but he was not afraid of the head at all. He took a step forward, and his aura surged out like an erupting volcano. In an instant, the surrounding space froze. If it was not a head but a complete human figure, perhaps the middle-aged man would not dare to fight it. However, it was only a head now, so he was not afraid at all. Beside the middle-aged man, Old Man Gu was not to be outdone either. He advanced together with the middle-aged man. Although his pressure was not as sharp as the middle-aged man's, it was not much weaker. Seeing Old Man Gu and the middle-aged man advancing together, the head's pupils constricted. Old Man Gu and the middle-aged man's aura was not much weaker than his. In a sense, they were even stronger. Damn it! If I hadn't been dismembered by Tsangjia and only have this head left, you two would be nothing more than ants in my eyes. How could I let you two ride on my head? The head said with a fearful gaze. A real man does not boast about his past glory. Back then, you were indeed mighty and awe-inspiring. But now you are only a head. What can a mere head do to us? The middle-aged man sneered and raised his right finger. Instantly, the falling star finger came crashing down from the sky. Countless stars revolved around the surface of the falling star finger. The falling star finger looked dazzling and powerful. When the falling star finger came crashing down, the head narrowed his eyes and revealed a cautious expression. He snorted coldly and said, "You forced me to do this." After saying that, the head took a deep breath and blew. Although the giant seven-colored whirlpool cracked, the 4 seven-colored whirlpools around it were intact. The moment the head blew, the 7-colored whirlpool closest to the head completely cracked. When the 7-colored whirlpool cracked, a black gas came out from it. The moment the black gas appeared, it transformed into a ferocious phantom of a giant hand. The giant hand was dark, and there were many black whirlpools around its arm. It looked as though there were countless black eyes on the arm. It looked quite strange. The phantom of the giant hand suddenly grabbed at the sky. It seemed as though the entire sky was being grabbed by it. It caused the surrounding sky to crack and black cracks to appear in the void. It looked extremely strange. The hand met the falling star finger. When the hand and the finger collided, the entire space seemed to freeze and fell into an extremely quiet state. Of course, this silence did not last for long before it was replaced by continuous explosions. Endless collapses appeared in the void, and these collapses were not intermittent. Instead, they were continuous and unending. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes and snorted coldly. He gave Old Gu, who was beside him, a look. Old Gu understood and nodded. He formed a seal with his right hand and sent out seals. Countless red arrays appeared. Thousand-array image. Old Gu's right hand struck out in the void. Thousands of red arrays stacked together and formed an extremely deep red mark. The red mark flew out from Old Gu's right hand and imprinted on the giant black hand. Immediately, the giant black hand, which was originally on par with the falling star finger, fell into a state of decline and was even forced to retreat. The head's eyes were extremely gloomy. It took a deep breath and blew again. The second whirlpool exploded, and a black mark that was dozens of feet in size flew out from it. The black mark flew out and immediately imprinted on the giant black hand. Immediately, the giant black hand, which had fallen into a state of decline, suddenly exploded with an even more terrifying aura. It actually suppressed the falling star finger and the thousand-array image. Bang! 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 With the support of the black mark, the giant black hand was much more powerful. The falling star finger did not last long before it completely collapsed. Immediately after, the thousand-array image also completely shattered. The giant black hand did not lose its momentum. It suddenly landed on the heads of the middle-aged man and Old Gu. It was like a giant hand that covered the sky. It formed a huge black shadow that completely enveloped the two of them. The middle-aged man and Old Gu's expressions turned grave. The middle-aged man curled his right hand again and raised it to the sky. He said in a deep voice, "Meteor finger." As soon as he said that, endless meteors began to fall from the sky with the middle-aged man as the center. Among the countless meteors, a A finger surrounded by countless meteors slowly stretched out from the void. This finger was fundamentally different from the falling star finger. The falling star finger surrounded the sky full of stars, but this meteor finger was derived from the meteors. Its power was much stronger than the falling star finger. The meteor finger pressed down and blasted on the giant black hand. It completely stopped the giant black hand from moving forward. The head's eyes were gloomy. It blew out 2 breaths and said coldly, "It seems that if I don't use my final trump card, the 2 of you won't let this go, right? Today I'll let you 2 ants see my true strength." After blowing out 2 breaths of air, the remaining 2 7-colored vortexes completely collapsed. A large black halberd flew out from one of the 7-colored vortexes. Of course, this large black halberd was just like the large hand. It was also a formless and incorporeal shadow. However, even if it was just a shadow, the aura that the giant halberd displayed was still enough to make people tremble in fear. The space collapsed. The moment the large black halberd was grabbed by the large black hand, it flung out violently. Countless black halberd shadows shot out, enveloping tens of thousands of miles of space. Under the countless halberd shadows, the meteor finger started to tremble, as if it would collapse at any moment. After the giant black halberd flew out, the other 7-colored whirlpool also collapsed. However, after the 7-colored whirlpool collapsed, it was empty. When the white-haired head saw that the 4th whirlpool was empty, his eyes were filled with shock and anger. He couldn't help but roar. "Which damn bastard? How dare he take away my second eye? Who is it?" The white-haired head roared at the sky. However, his eyes quickly locked onto Old Goo and the middle-aged man. He roared, "It must be the 2 of you. What despicable ants. Today, I won't let the 2 of you go." The white-haired head let out a loud cry. Immediately, an extremely dense black fog erupted from its neck. This black fog began to continuously gather and squirm below its neck. Finally, it revealed an extremely muscular body. However, this body was formed by the black fog and looked slightly illusory. The right hand of this body was empty. The white-haired head whistled, and the big hand holding the black halberd suddenly swept over and finally stuck to the right hand of this body. The white-haired head clenched his right hand, and a terrifying light immediately erupted from his eyes. He sneered, "Although it's only an illusory body, it's enough to deal with the 2 of you. Hand over your lives. You're looking to die for taking away my second eye." With that, the white-haired head took a step forward and arrived before the middle-aged man and Old Goo in the blink of an eye. He swung his right hand and the giant black halberd suddenly slashed out. It directly slashed towards the middle-aged man and Old Goo. The tip of the halberd shone with a dazzling black light. The black light was like black lightning. As the halberd swept out, it actually exploded. It was as if the entire space would collapse from a single swing of the halberd. The middle-aged man and Old Goo immediately became stern. The middle-aged man pointed with his finger again and said with a deep voice, "Celestial technique, chaotic star cloud finger." With that, extremely large nebulae appeared above the middle-aged man. The nebulae were arranged in an extremely chaotic manner and intertwined with each other. The nebulae intertwined chaotically and vaguely formed the embryonic form of a huge finger. It was as if the nebulae were arranged together to form the shape of a finger. It was completely natural. This finger was also the middle-aged man's ultimate finger. Its power was many times stronger than his previous falling star finger and meteor finger. It was as if the stars in the starry sky would fall from the sky as a result of this finger. Myriad formation image. Old Goo was not to be outdone. In an instant he formed tens of thousands of red formations. Red ripples spread out as if the surrounding space was completely sealed. It was extremely terrifying. The chaotic star cloud finger and the myriad formation image crushed down together, and finally clashed with the white-haired head. Boom, boom, boom. The white-haired head wielded the giant black halberd and swung it. As if it was following some kind of heavenly law, it exploded with shocking energy of heaven and earth. Old Goo remained motionless in the myriad formation image. As for the middle-aged man, he was in the center of the chaotic star cloud finger. Countless nebulae surrounded the middle-aged man, making him look like a god or a demon. Chapter 1704. Devouring mastered the battle between the three of them was too terrifying. The entire broken skull abyss was shaking violently. Zhuowen, who was hundreds of thousands of feet away, was complaining in his heart. Although he had hidden far enough away to avoid the effects of the primordial spirit explosion, the three of them were not ordinary people. Even though he was far away, the aftermath of the battle still seriously affected Zhuowen. Pucci. Finally, the battle between the three of them became more and more intense. The aftermath of the battle was like a tsunami. Under the influence of the aftermath, Zhuowen's face turned pale, and he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. No, if this continues, I will definitely be killed by the aftermath of the battle. I have to push this fragment further away. Thinking of this, Zhuowen immediately summoned the Blood Immortal. As soon as the Blood Immortal appeared, she looked at Zhuowen with a fawning expression. However, when she saw Zhuowen standing motionless at the teleportation array, her eyes suddenly narrowed and emitted a strange light. But soon, the Blood Immortal realized the terrifying aftermath around her. Her body couldn't help but tremble. She subconsciously said, "What a terrifying aftermath. Who are these three people? Don't talk nonsense. If you don't want to die, hurry up and push this fragment far away. These three people are too terrifying. If you don't leave, you and I will both die." Zhuowen coldly snorted. The Blood Immortal's eyes flashed. She grinned and said, "Master, don't worry. I will push this fragment further away." As she spoke, the Blood Immortal turned into a bloody light and rushed under the fragment. She reached out her claws and grabbed the bottom of the fragment. Then, the Blood Immortal exploded with her speed and quickly fled away from the battle. The aftermath of the battle was too terrifying. The Blood Immortal naturally didn't dare to stay here for long. After all, the longer she stayed, the more dangerous it would be. After a while, the Blood Immortal rushed to the entrance of the Broken Skull Abyss and barely stopped. This place was millions of miles away from the core of the Broken Skull Abyss. The distance was extremely far, but even here, she could still feel the terrifying tremors. It was as if the entire Broken Skull Abyss was trembling under the tremors. Oh my God! What kind of monsters were those three? It's as if I'm an ant that can be squashed to death at any time in front of them. It's too scary. The Blood Immortal let out a sigh of relief, but there was still a lingering fear in her eyes. The pressure that the three of them gave her was really too terrifying. Even though she was hiding far away, she still felt frightened. However, the Blood Immortal's eyes quickly fell on Zhuowen, who was not far away. At this moment, Zhuowen's body was motionless. The Blood Immortal squinted her eyes and smiled. "Master, what happened to you? Why are you standing there without moving? Are you practicing some kind of cultivation technique?" Zhuowen looked at the Blood Immortal indifferently and said, "You have done well. Now, you can return to the spirit ring." The Blood Immortal's eyes slowly narrowed, but she suddenly smiled and said, "Master, why are you in such a hurry to let me return to the spiritual ring? This little one has just come out. Don't you want some fresh air?" Hearing this, Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. He knew that the Blood Immortal had already found out something, but he still looked calm and said coldly, "Blood Immortal, are you going to try the taste of the blood mark again?" The Blood Immortal's eyes showed a trace of fear. Obviously, she was very afraid of the blood mark. But soon she grinned and said, "Master, I see that you can't move now. You can't use the blood mark, right? With Master's personality, if you use the blood mark, you won't say it out loud. Instead, you will use it directly to punish me." After saying this, the Blood Immortal silently observed Zhuowen. She found that Zhuowen was still motionless. Then, she looked up to the sky and laughed. As expected, "Zhuowen, although I don't know what happened to you, but now that you can't move, you are finished." Saying this, the Blood Immortal stomped her right foot and suddenly rushed towards Zhuowen. Her whole body was covered with blood thunder, like a terrifying ancient beast. Looking at the Blood Immortal rushing towards him, Zhuowen's eyes became colder. This Blood Immortal was really born to be rebellious. If anything happened to Zhuowen, or if his strength was not enough to threaten the Blood Immortal, she would immediately attack him. "Kid, the suppression on your body has been completely removed." This suppression was too terrifying. It took a lot of energy from me and the old fox. Suddenly, Xiaohei's slightly tired voice sounded in Zhuowen's mind. Then, Zhuowen only felt that the suppression on his body had receded like a tide, and he also regained his freedom of movement. At this moment, the blood immortal was only a few dozen meters away from Zhuowen. He could even clearly see the smug smile on the blood immortal's face. Zhuowen snorted coldly. His right hand formed a seal, and suddenly, dozens of blood marks appeared. Once the blood marks appeared, the blood immortal held her head with both hands and couldn't help but scream. She directly fell to the ground and kept struggling. Her eyes were filled with blood red in pain. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. His right hand formed a seal again, and suddenly, hundreds of blood marks appeared. When the hundreds of blood marks completely imprinted into the blood immortal's brain, the blood immortal exploded with an earth-shattering scream. "Master, I was wrong. Please let me go. I won't dare to do it again. Master, please spare me." The blood immortal quickly kneeled on the ground and kept kowtowing to Zhuowen. Her face looked hideous because of the intense pain. Zhuowen ignored the blood immortal and said lightly, 49 days. Go into the spiritual ring, and reflect on yourself. Saying this, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and put the blood immortal into the spiritual ring. The blood immortal inside the spiritual ring was screaming in pain, but she was secretly regretting. She knew that this pain would last for 49 days. She was very regretful now. She shouldn't have attacked Zhuowen before. Unfortunately, it was too late to regret now. After dealing with the blood immortal, Zhuowen didn't immediately leave the broken nightmare abyss. Instead, he first put the fragment that contained the teleportation array into the Black Dragon Palace. His eyes fell on the deepest part of the broken nightmare abyss. There the middle-aged man, the old man, and the white-haired head were still fighting. From the current state of the battle, it would be difficult to determine the winner without a few thousand rounds of battle. Zhuowen silently watched the battle. The power of these three people was completely out of the scope of what Zhuowen could understand. Every move contained the truth of heaven and earth. It was as if their power was the strongest power born from heaven and earth. Xiaohei flew in front of Zhuowen and said in a deep voice, "These three people all have the battle strength of a true immortal. Kid, watch carefully. Perhaps it will be hard for you to hide the benefits in the future." Zhuowen nodded. The battle between the three of them had indeed given him quite a bit of inspiration. However, the reason why he had stayed behind was not to comprehend the battle between the three of them, but because the old man was a saint master. "Chen Shui, I found a saint master." Zhuowen's eyes blurred as he murmured in a low voice. Xiaohei looked at Zhuowen's appearance and couldn't help but sigh. Although it wanted to persuade him, it also knew that it was completely useless. It was very clear that Zhuowen had a very stubborn temper. For the person he loved, perhaps he could even sacrifice his life. The battle lasted for 3 months. During these 3 months, the entire shattered nightmare abyss was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The countless fragments in the abyss were all smashed to smithereens. During this period, Zhuowen often hid far away to avoid the powerful shockwaves. Fortunately, he possessed the lightning wings, the laws of the void, and the laws of the void, so he was able to avoid every single shockwave. Bastard, if it weren't for the fact that my second eye was taken away by someone, how could I have been suppressed and defeated by you two ants? I refuse to accept this. Suddenly, the white-haired head that was fighting the battle roared loudly. Afterwards, his illusory body and black halberd collapsed. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, and a dispirited expression appeared on his face. At the same time, the old man took a step forward with an extremely serious expression in his eyes. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, he summoned a purple gold alms bowl. As soon as the alms bowl appeared, it rapidly swelled to several dozen times its original size. Then it flipped over and covered the white-haired head. Bastard! An earth-shattering roar came from within the purple gold alms bowl. Immediately, countless rumbling sounds came from within. Clearly, the white-haired head was continuously attacking from the inside. Traces of cracks actually appeared on the surface of the purple gold alms bowl. Because of this, the old man's eyes were extremely serious. Then, with a wave of his right sleeve, he formed seals with both hands and formed seals. Immediately, Complicated seals shot out from his hands and imprinted themselves on the surface of the alms bowl. The moment the seals entered the alms bowl, the cracks on the surface began to heal at a visible rate. The aura on the surface became even more vast than before. "Divine Master, lend me a hand," Gudu called out to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man took a step forward and placed his right hand on Gudu's shoulder. Surging energy surged into Gudu's body like a tide. With the support of the middle-aged man's energy, Gugu swiftly formed many seals. The seals that were revealed this time around were much stronger than before. When these seals rushed onto the surface of the purple gold alms bowl, the originally swaying purple gold alms bowl became completely quiet. Clearly, the white-haired head had been completely suppressed. After doing that, Gudu exhaled gently. He wiped the cold sweat on his forehead with his right hand and said fearfully, "What a terrifying fellow. Just a head is so difficult to deal with." The middle-aged man's face paled. He said with a deep voice, "It's an existence of that level after all. And if it weren't for the fact that the head has lost its second eye, we probably wouldn't have been its opponent. Actually, we're quite lucky this time." Gudu nodded in agreement. The white-haired head's most powerful attack was probably the second eye it spoke of. After all, the white-haired head became extremely furious after discovering that the second eye had disappeared, as if it had lost its life. "We've collected the head. It's time for us to leave," said Gudu. Chapter 1705. Battle of the Gods. The middle-aged man exclaimed softly. He turned around and just happened to see Zhuowen flash over like a ray of light. "So it's that little fellow. He actually dares to approach us after seeing the battle between the three of us. He's quite bold, isn't he?" The corners of the middle-aged man's mouth curled up slightly, while a trace of admiration appeared in his eyes. Elder Gu followed the middle-aged man's gaze and saw Zhuowen flash over explosively. For some unknown reason, he was able to sense that the young man's gaze was filled with burning desire, and that burning gaze was staring right at him. This caused Elder Gu to reveal a strange expression. Swoosh. In next to no time, Zhuowen flashed over to Elder Gu and the middle-aged man, and his gaze stared right at Elder Gu. After that, he cupped his hands in an extremely respectful manner and said, "I'm Zhuowen. Greetings, seniors. May I know if you're a Saint Celestial Master?" Elder Gu and the middle-aged man exchanged glances, and then Elder Gu gazed at Zhuowen and pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "I'm indeed a Saint Celestial Master. What's the matter?" In the eyes of Elder Gu and the middle-aged man, Zhuowen was no different than an ant, and they originally didn't intend to pay too much attention to Zhuowen. However, when they thought about how Zhuowen was able to survive the battle between the three of them, and had actually overcome the suppression of the middle-aged man's gaze, Elder Gu and the middle-aged man aroused a trace of interest in Zhuowen. The middle-aged man sized up Zhuowen from top to bottom and clicked his tongue in wonder as he said, "Based on his physique, he's actually a heaven-defying Saint Celestial Master. Even though his natural talent can't compare to Yuan Hongwen, he's still a one-in-a-million genius." At this moment, Zhuowen's attention was completely focused on Elder Gu. After he heard Elder Gu admit that he was a Saint Celestial Master, his expression became extremely excited, and he was even slightly at a loss for what to do. "Young friend, may I know what you need?" Elder Gu frowned slightly when he saw Zhuowen's helpless appearance. Although Zhuowen's talent wasn't bad, it really couldn't enter his eyes. At this moment, seeing Zhuowen suddenly blocking their way, he naturally felt a little impatient. Zhuowen naturally saw the impatience on Old Gu's face. He took in a deep breath and slowly calmed his somewhat agitated heart. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Elder, this junior has heard that the Celestial Saint Master has already come into contact with the level of the soul, and has extremely deep attainments in the aspect of the soul. Therefore, this junior has a presumptuous request." Having said that, Zhuowen flicked his finger and took out a crystal coffin from his spirit ring. In the crystal coffin, a beautiful woman lay quietly with her hands crossed in front of her chest. Her beautiful face was full of tranquility. The woman's eyes were slightly closed as if she had fallen into a deep sleep. Her clean face was like a sleeping beauty. The moment he took out the crystal coffin, Zhuowen's hands trembled. His eyes were filled with gentleness because the woman in the crystal coffin was his beloved woman. She was the woman he was willing to give up everything to save. Elder Gu originally didn't want to pay attention to Zhuowen, but when he saw the woman in the crystal coffin, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise and rushed over to the crystal coffin. At this moment, Elder Gu looked at the woman in the crystal coffin and slowly frowned. He shook his head and muttered in a low voice, "The body has collapsed and only a soul that has no consciousness is left. Moreover, this soul is already on the verge of collapse. This really is strange. How did this happen?" Seeing Elder Gu sizing up Mu Qinxue in the crystal coffin, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of hope. He quickly said, "In the past, Qinshue's memories were forcefully extracted by someone. Later on, the extracted memories shattered and finally affected her soul so it's like this. This old man took a look, and it wasn't just her memories that were extracted. There was also a crucial part of her soul. It was this crucial part of her soul that caused her memories to shatter. Not only did she lose her memories, even her soul began to collapse. Moreover, this collapse is fatal," Elder Gu said in a deep voice. Seeing that Elder Gu was saying the same thing, the hope in Zhuowen's eyes became even stronger. He knew that the Saint Master in front of him might be able to save Mu Qinxue. "Senior, can you save Qinxue? For this junior is willing to pay any price." Zhuowen suddenly knelt in the air and solemnly bowed to Elder Gu. He, Zhuowen, did not bow to the heavens, did not bow to gods, and did not bow to life and death. However, for Mu Qinxue, who was also his wife, he was willing to give up his dignity and kneel down to Elder Gu. Elder Gu slightly knit his brows and said in a deep voice, "The soul is an extremely important part, but it is also an extremely fragile thing. If a part of the soul is missing, it will bring about fatal destruction. If you want to save someone with a missing soul, the price you have to pay is hard to imagine. Moreover, the success rate is not high. You and I are not related, so why should this old man pay such a large price to help you?" Zhuowen's body trembled. He also knew that Elder Gu was not related to him at all, so why would he pay such a large price to treat Mu Qinxue? "Senior, this junior has something that is very likely to be a true immortal sacred artifact. This true immortal sacred artifact should be enough to exchange for senior to treat my wife, right?" A determined light flashed in Zhuowen's eyes. At this moment, when faced with the opportunity to save Mu Qinxue, he would rather expose the Azure Dragon Palace and firmly grasp this opportunity. True immortal sacred artifact. The middle-aged man and Elder Gu narrowed their eyes and began to size up Zhuowen. A true immortal sacred artifact was extremely rare. Even the forces behind them could not underestimate a true immortal sacred artifact. The forces behind them only had one or two of such treasures. However, this young man in front of them, whose cultivation was only at the heaven-defying saint realm, actually had a true immortal sacred artifact. This made them suspicious. Although this junior has never seen a true immortal sacred artifact, I did not know the origin of this sacred artifact when I first obtained it. However, as I continue to use it, this sacred artifact has become more and more extraordinary. This junior can conclude that this sacred artifact is very likely a true immortal sacred artifact, Zhuowen said in a deep voice. "In that case, take out this sacred artifact and have a look. Whether it is a true immortal sacred artifact or not, the two of us will naturally be able to tell." The middle-aged man chuckled, but his eyes were full of ridicule. In his eyes he did not think that Zhuowen had a true immortal sacred artifact. After all, Zhuowen's cultivation was too low. Elder Gu and the middle-aged man's thoughts were the same. Zhuowen nodded. With a flick of his finger, he was about to take out the Azure Dragon Palace when a ray of light shot out from his spirit ring. In the end, the light's true appearance was revealed. The middle-aged man and Elder Gu stared at the light's true appearance with a strange look in their eyes. This was because what appeared in front of them was only a long sword that burst out with the shadow of the sun. It was the 9th Yongdao sword. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He had clearly planned to take out the Azure Dragon Palace, but he had unexpectedly taken out the 9th Yongdao sword. You must not show the Azure Dragon Palace to these two people in front of you. Otherwise, you will definitely lose your life. A cold voice suddenly rang out in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen immediately recognized the owner of the voice. It was none other than the first mountain god. Zhuowen knew that it was the first mountain god's doing. Zhuowen frowned slightly. Just as he was about to refute, the first mountain god's voice rang out again. He said, "If you really plan to hand over the Azure Dragon Palace, then don't blame me for being ruthless. I won't kill you, but I will separate your wife from you forever." When those words were spoken, Zhuowen's gaze became extremely gloomy. There was even a faint trace of anger within that gloominess. However, he forcefully suppressed that anger. The first mountain god was too powerful. If the first mountain god really wanted to kill Mu Qinxue, it was impossible for him to stop him with his current strength. "This is a true immortal saint artifact? Little friend, are you playing with us?" Elder Gu said coldly. The middle-aged man found it funny. He could not help but laugh out loud. He said, "This is only a small part of an earthly immortal saint artifact. It can only be considered a lesser immortal artifact. There is a huge difference between it and a true immortal saint artifact. Boy, are you planning to fool us? God Lord, this kid is actually playing with us. I can't just accept this." Elder Gu frowned. The middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "It's fine." Speaking up to there, the middle-aged man glanced at the crystal coffin beside Zhuowen. A sliver of reminiscence appeared in his eyes. He said softly, "Seeing that you're an infatuated person who values relationships, the two of us won't make things difficult for you. If you really want Elder Gu to treat your wife, you'll have to pay a huge price. It just so happens that the chaotic divine temple has begun to confer the chaotic war god and hold a war of gods. If you can stand out in the war of gods and become the champion, I can help you ask Elder Gu to treat your wife." Zhuowen was stunned. Soon after, he trembled. His gloomy eyes immediately began to shine with a scorching light. He clasped his hands and said, "May I ask what are the conditions for participating in the war of gods?" The middle-aged man chuckled and said, "Once you leave the Shattered Elephant Abyss, you'll naturally know the exact details of the war of gods. In the next 5 years, the war of gods will definitely erupt. At that time, if you want to treat your wife, you'll have to become the champion." Speaking up to there, the middle-aged man glanced at Zhuowen meaningfully before waving his hand. Immediately, the space around him began to distort. Both the middle-aged man and Elder Gu vanished from the spot in an instant. Zhuowen stared blankly at the middle-aged man and Elder Gu who had vanished. The hope in his eyes grew denser and denser. Sometimes, what people lacked was not motivation, but hope. As long as you had hope, you would have endless motivation. Right now, Zhuowen's hope was to save Mu Qinxue. For that, he would participate in the War of Gods and become the champion. I, Zhuowen, will definitely participate in the War of Gods. With that, Zhuowen withdrew the fragment from the Azure Dragon Hall. Now that the middle-aged man and Elder Gu had left, the first mountain god did not stop Zhuowen from using the hall. Chapter 1706. An eerie mist. Zhuowen felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. When the dizziness gradually subsided, he slowly opened his eyes. Only then did he clearly see his surroundings. He saw that there were layers of fog all around him. These fog layers seemed to be extremely afraid of light. When Zhuowen's teleportation produced a white light, the surrounding fog rapidly retreated. In the blink of an eye, an empty space with a radius of 10,000 feet was formed. However, when the white light surrounding Zhuowen gradually faded, a strong sense of danger suddenly rose in Zhuowen's heart. The surrounding black fog was like a ferocious beast with its mouth wide open. It suddenly gathered toward Zhuowen, as if it wanted to drown Zhuowen. Without hesitation, Zhuowen summoned the 9 flames karmic fire. From what he saw earlier, the black fog was extremely afraid of light. Therefore, he decided to give it a try and summoned the 9 flames karmic fire. Sure enough, the moment the 9 flames karmic fire was unleashed, the surrounding layers of black fog seemed to have met its natural enemy and dispersed. It circled around Zhuowen for hundreds of meters, not daring to approach. Zhuowen, who was in the 9 flames of karma, began to carefully observe the surrounding black fog. His scalp immediately went numb. This was because the black fog that gathered around them was not real fog. Instead, it was made up of densely packed black crawling insects. These reptiles were only the size of a thumb. They had sharp mouthparts at the front and 3 pairs of thin wings on their backs. They were somewhat similar to mosquitoes. The eyes of these reptiles were glowing with a green light. They looked extremely strange as they stared straight at Zhuowen. If it weren't for the 9 flames karmic fire surrounding Zhuowen, the worms would have swarmed up and devoured Zhuowen. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He never thought that he would appear in such a strange place as soon as he was teleported out. He could not help but ask Xiaohe, "Xiaohe, you came out from the teleportation formation back then. What is this place?" At this moment, Xiaohe turned into a black streak of light and landed on Zhuowen's shoulder. It looked around and a sliver of graveness appeared in its eyes. It said, "If I remember correctly, I should have been teleported to a certain prefecture in the Central Plains. Something like this has never happened before. Then why have we been teleported to this place that is neither a human nor a ghost?" Zhuowen frowned slightly as he stared at the endless reptiles around him and asked Xiaohe karmic fire. Xiaohe shrugged and said rather awkwardly, "I'm not sure about that. That teleportation formation has existed for several thousand years. It's far too long ago. Perhaps that's the reason why there's a problem with the teleportation?" Veins bulged on Zhuowen's forehead when he saw Xiaohe's awkward expression. He really wanted to give Xiaohe a vicious beating right now. It had screwed him over again. If he had known that the teleportation formation would teleport him to such an unfamiliar place, he would have rather retraced his steps than enter the teleportation formation. Unfortunately, he had now boarded a pirate ship. Zhuowen sighed softly. Soon after, he used the 9 flames karmic fire to rush off in a certain direction. Currently, he was surrounded by so many reptiles that practically obscured his vision. As a result, Zhuowen could only use this rather foolish method. Zhuowen's speed was extremely fast. Soon after, he stepped onto solid ground. Soon after, he was shocked to find that the ground beneath his feet was not icy cold. Instead, it was somewhat soft. When he lowered his head to take a look, he found that there was actually something like a wall of flesh beneath his feet. Moreover, this wall of flesh was constantly squirming. Zhuowen furrowed his brows and became increasingly puzzled. He had many doubts about where this place was. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that the reptiles around him were extremely fearful of him the moment he stepped onto the wall of flesh. They all stopped outside the wall of flesh and did not dare to enter. Without the obstruction of these reptiles, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and withdrew the 9 flames karmic fire. Soon after, he quickly rushed along the wall of flesh. However, as time passed, Zhuowen discovered that he was still within this wall of flesh. It was as if this passage was endless and had no end. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Suddenly, a thick blood mist suddenly spurted out from the upper left side of Zhuowen. This blood mist carried a pungent stench as it instantly swept toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He pointed his right finger at the void. Immediately, 3,000 yellow spring water droplets surrounded him, forming an extremely sturdy defense. The blood mist instantly enveloped Zhuowen. Soon after, there was the sound of corrosion. Zhuowen's pupils shrank as he discovered that under the blood mist, the yellow spring water droplets were rapidly being destroyed. In an instant, 1,000 yellow spring water droplets had been destroyed. Without hesitation, Zhuowen took out the first Yangdao sword and the 9th Yangdao sword. The 2 Dao swords turned into 2 long rainbows and revolved around Zhuowen, forming 2 blazing sun shadows. The yellow spring water droplets were all destroyed. The blood mist began to touch the 2 Dao swords. However, what made Zhuowen's face turn gloomy was that the blood mist's corrosiveness was too terrifying. It actually began to corrode the sun shadows around the 2 Dao swords. Just as Zhuowen frowned slightly, there was a commotion in his spiritual ring. He heard the blood immortal's voice from inside. "Master, I was wrong. In order to make up for my sins, let me redeem myself." Hearing this, Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He still released the blood immortal. Once the blood immortal came out, she held her head and knelt in front of Zhuowen. She kept kowtowing and said, "Master, I can't take it anymore. Please help me remove the blood mark's punishment." Zhuowen sneered. He waved his sleeve and removed the blood mark from the blood immortal's body. He then said, "Do you have a way to get rid of the blood mist around here?" After the blood mark was removed, The blood immortal let out a sigh of relief. She quickly said, "Yes, this blood mist contains an extremely powerful blood power. This blood power has an unimaginable corrosive power to ordinary people. However, to me it is a great supplement, so." Speaking of this, the blood immortal stole a glance at Zhuowen. She wanted to find some clues from Zhuowen's face. Unfortunately, Zhuowen's eyes were indifferent. She could not read his thoughts at all. "Okay, go ahead," Zhuowen said lightly. Hearing this, the blood immortal's eyes were filled with joy. She quickly bowed to Zhuowen and jumped out. With the help of Zhuowen, she swept past the defense of the two Dao swords and instantly jumped into the blood mist around her. The blood immortal's body was in the blood mist. Her entire body was covered with blood lightning. The blood lightning grew larger and larger, until it completely covered the blood mist. The strange thing was that as the blood lightning spread out, the blood mist around it was like a whale sucking in water. It began to be absorbed by the blood lightning. The blood lightning's absorption speed was extremely fast. In less than half an incense stick's time, the blood mist around it was completely absorbed. After absorbing the blood mist, the blood lightning was now as bright as blood. It was extremely red and looked extremely strange. The blood immortal opened her mouth and swallowed all the blood lightning into her stomach. Her face suddenly became extremely red, and her eyes shone with traces of blood light. The blood immortal's aura also rose and climbed to an extremely powerful level. After the blood mist disappeared, Zhuowen looked in the direction of the blood mist. He saw that on the upper left, there was a hole that was several feet wide. The hole was surrounded by blood-red flesh walls. It looked extremely strange. However, after the blood mist was spat out, the hole slowly closed. In the end, it was not much different from the flesh walls around it. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He immediately sat there cross-legged and waited silently. The blood immortal naturally did not dare to wander around. She stood not far behind Zhuowen like a loyal guard. Zhuowen sat there cross-legged for 3 days. Finally, on this day, the flesh wall on the upper left suddenly wriggled. Soon after, the hole appeared again. The thick blood mist was also spat out from the hole. Seeing the thick blood mist, the blood immortal's eyes flashed with excitement. She glanced at Zhuowen as if she was asking for Zhuowen's opinion. "Swallow the blood mist and enter the hole together," Zhuowen said coldly. The blood immortal roared and rushed out. The blood lightning in her body surged out again and instantly enveloped the blood mist that was spat out. Without a doubt, the blood lightning's speed of swallowing was very fast. In just a moment, it had swallowed almost 10% of the blood mist. Zhuowen quietly followed behind the blood immortal. With the blood immortal swallowing the blood mist in front, the blood mist was not a threat to him at all. The two of them slowly approached the hole above. When the blood mist was completely spat out, the hole began to squirm, and then slowly began to close. "Rush over." Zhuowen's eyes flashed as he ordered the blood immortal coldly. The blood immortal reluctantly looked at the blood mist that hadn't been completely absorbed. However, she didn't dare to disobey Zhuowen's order. She sighed, broke through the blood mist, and rushed towards the hole. The moment the hole closed, the blood immortal and Zhuowen were like shuttles that went into the hole. The hole closed again, and became a part of the flesh wall. This was a narrow tunnel. Zhuowen's eyes flashed coldly. After putting the blood immortal into the spirit ring, his body shook in like lightning. He quickly rushed towards the tunnel. This tunnel was not as long as Zhuowen imagined. In just a moment, Zhuowen arrived at the exit in front. The moment Zhuowen rushed out, the surrounding space suddenly twisted as if the stars were moving. Zhuowen only felt that the scene in front of him changed. He realized that he was no longer surrounded by a flesh wall, but a dense forest. Whoosh! Whoosh! The moment Zhuowen appeared in the forest, the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. Zhuowen's eyes were cold. The first Yangdao sword and the 9th Yangdao sword suddenly flew out and formed 2 blazing sun shadows that surrounded his body. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the sound of air being torn apart came and crashed onto the 2 blazing sun shadows. There were continuous collisions. However, what surprised Zhuowen was that these collisions were extremely weak. They did not cause the 2 Dao swords to shake even a little bit. Chapter 1707. Ancient language. Just as Zhuowen's eyes were filled with astonishment, cries of surprise rang out from the surroundings. Soon after, Zhuowen saw that there were many flickering figures in the surroundings. The figures were flickering, and it looked rather strange. What made Zhuowen even more surprised was that these flickering figures did not have any saint energy aura on them. It was as if they were all ordinary people. The moment Zhuowen revealed the first Yangdao sword and the 9th Yangdao sword, the figures in the surroundings were filled with fear. Soon after, they all scattered and fled into the depths of the forest. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. In an instant, he swept to the side of the person closest to him. With a point of his right hand, saint energy gushed out, and the person was confined to the spot. Zhuowen sized up the person in front of him. He noticed that this person's attire was extremely strange. He was wearing clothes made of animal skin, and there were green patterns drawn on his body. The moment he was confined to the spot by Zhuowen, the person's eyes were filled with fear. His lips moved, and strange words came out of his mouth. This made Zhuowen frown slightly. He did not understand the language at all. Ancient language? Suddenly, Xiaohei, who was hidden in his consciousness, turned into a black light and swept to Zhuowen's shoulder. He stared at the man in animal skin in front of him in shock. What is he saying? And the ancient language? Is it the language of the ancient era? Zhuowen was surprised. He immediately stared at Xiaohei on his shoulder, and asked in surprise. Xiaohei nodded repeatedly and said, "This person is only begging for mercy. However, I am surprised that this person knows the ancient language. Generally speaking, after the catastrophe of the ancient era, there are very few people who know the ancient language except for a few old monsters who were lucky enough to survive. Furthermore, the person in front of us has no saint energy aura at all. It's obvious that he's not a saint yet. The aura on his body is even weaker. It's unbelievable that such an ordinary being would know the ancient language," Xiaohei said with a frown. Perhaps sensing the surprise in Zhuowen's eyes, Xiaohei waved her little paw. Suddenly, an ink-black ray of light shot out and entered between Zhuowen's eyebrows. This is the basic grammar of the ancient language. You should be able to understand the ancient language after learning it, Xiaohei said calmly. Zhuowen skimmed through the grammar of the ancient language that Xiaohei had passed to him. With his current realm and cultivation, he was naturally able to grasp most of the grammar of the ancient language. On the other hand, Zhuowen was barely able to understand what the man in animal skin was saying. Where is this place? Zhuowen asked in the ancient language with some difficulty. The man in beast skin stared at Zhuowen in fear and said, "Illusion God. You are the illusion god? Please don't kill me." As he spoke, the man in beast skin immediately knelt on the ground while shivering, and he finally muttered the name of the illusion god. Zhuowen frowned slightly as he stared at the man in beast skin's display. He didn't have any impression of the illusion god that the man in beast skin spoke of, and he didn't know what the illusion god was. Zhuowen's gaze flickered as he asked indifferently, "I won't kill you. Tell me where this place is." The man in beast skin sized up Zhuowen secretly, and when he noticed that Zhuowen really didn't intend to kill him, the fear in his heart lessened greatly. However, at the same time, he was rather puzzled by Zhuowen's question. However, for the sake of not infuriating the illusion god that the man spoke of, he naturally replied honestly, "I'm a member of the Qin Tian tribe." As the man in beast skin spoke, Zhuowen gained a rough understanding of the situation here. There were a total of 3 tribes here, and every tribe had a few thousand clansmen. The 3 tribes kept each other in check. More importantly, although the 3 tribes kept each other in check, every clansman had a mission in their hearts, and that was to protect the sacrificial tower in the center of the 3 tribes. It was said that this sacrificial tower was an ancestral treasure passed down by their ancestors, and they needed to protect it for generations. As for where this place was, the man in beast skin didn't know, but Zhuowen knew that this place was definitely not the central region. As for where it was, he couldn't say. Although the person in front of me doesn't have the aura of saint power, his body is quite strong, and his physique is much stronger than ordinary warriors. Zhuowen thought to himself, and he became very interested in this place. Also, what was the matter with the transportation array? Why would he be teleported here? Where was this place? Take me to your tribe, Zhuowen said indifferently. The man in beast skin's pupils shrank, and his lips trembled as he said, Our tribe doesn't allow the illusion god to enter. If you go to the tribe, we will all be killed by the tribesmen. Zhuowen coldly stared at the man in beast skin, and said indifferently, If you don't want to die now, then take me there. The man in beast skin's heart trembled, but in the end he braced himself and said, No, the tribe doesn't allow the illusion god to enter. Once the illusion god sneaks into the tribe, it will cause a terrible disaster. Although I'm afraid of death, I won't harm the tribe. Zhuowen showed an impatient look. He knew that the man in beast skin wouldn't say anything, so he simply pressed his right hand on the man's Tianling point. Suddenly, the man's memory was unobstructed in front of Zhuowen. So that's how it is. The Qin Tian tribe isn't far from here. After saying that, Zhuowen raised his right hand and grabbed the man in beast skin. Then, like a gust of wind, he disappeared with the man in beast skin. Dozens of miles away from the jungle, there was a large tribe. In the tribe there were tiled houses, and there was an endless stream of clansmen. In a tall tower in the tribe, an old man slowly stood up. His eyes revealed a trace of seriousness as he looked at the people kneeling in front of him, and said in a deep voice, Is what you said true? The illusion god in human form has appeared again? If Zhuowen was here, he would definitely be able to recognize the people kneeling in front of the old man. They were the leaders of the group that attacked him before. At this moment, a robust young man raised his head and said rather fearfully, It's absolutely true. Nearly 100 of us threw out stone spears, but they didn't pose any threat to this person. Apart from the illusion god, I really can't think of anyone else with such formidable strength. The old man frowned slightly and said, According to my calculations, the illusion god should have appeared by now. However, I didn't expect that the illusion god in human form would appear this time. This is definitely a calamity that our 3 tribes need to be cautious of. I must notify the other 2 tribes. Also, our Qin Tian tribe will be on the highest alert. Also, activate the God Sealing Array laid down by our ancestors. With the God Sealing Array, the illusion god won't be able to enter. The people kneeling on the ground bowed from afar, and soon after, they slowly retreated. The old man took out a sparkling and translucent crystal, and chanted an ancient gray-colored language, as if he was transmitting some kind of message. In a short while, the entire Qin Tian tribe resounded with the sound of a bugle horn. The originally tranquil tribe was completely broken. The clansmen of the tribe all had flustered expressions. Among them, the old, the weak, the women, and the children hid in their own homes. As for the robust young men, they all took out sharp stone tools from their homes and gathered in the tribe's plaza. The sound of the bugle horn meant that the tribe had sunk into a state of extreme danger. The situation had reached an extremely critical level. At the same time, in the sky several miles around the tribe, an enormous blood-colored phantom of a strange beast appeared. The phantom roared towards the sky, and suddenly collapsed into countless rivers of blood. The terrifying rivers of blood turned into a blood-colored barrier, enveloping the entire Qin Tian tribe. God Sealing Array? What's happening in the tribe? In the tribe, many clansmen looked at the rivers of blood that enveloped the sky, and their gazes were filled with fear and solemnity. Generally speaking, the sound of the bugle horn indicated that something important was about to happen. Setting up the God Sealing Array meant that the tribe had reached a moment of life and death. Everyone, raise your spirits. A humanoid illusion god has appeared. This time, we can't let this kind of illusion god intrude into our tribe. Otherwise, it will bring disaster to our tribe. A robust man loudly shouted. Suddenly, a large commotion arose in the surroundings. Many clansmen were at a loss, and their eyes were filled with fear. There were even many clansmen who were trembling all over, and their faces were drained of blood. However, even more clansmen had unswerving determination in their eyes. They swore to protect the tribe's life and death. Whoosh! Not long after the God Sealing Array was set up in the Qin Tian tribe, a long rainbow instantly swept over, and stopped a few hundred meters away from the tribe. Zhuowen held the man in animal skin in his hand. His gaze fell on the God Sealing Array in front of him, and his expression was one of astonishment. Zhuowen was all too familiar with the aura of this god-sealing array. It was flowing with the textures of ancient restrictions. The moment Zhuowen swept over the god-sealing array, countless clansmen in the tribe naturally noticed Zhuowen. Immediately, they all revealed looks of panic. A humanoid illusion god. It really is a humanoid illusion god. The panic continued, and it even caused an uproar. However, when a white-haired old man walked out of the tower step by step, the noise in the outside world suddenly quieted down. Everyone, don't panic. With the god-sealing array, even a humanoid illusion god won't be able to cause any trouble, the old man said unhurriedly. The old man's words immediately calmed the panic in the hearts of many clansmen. Zhuowen frowned slightly and said indifferently, I think you have misunderstood. I am not the humanoid illusion god you speak of. I am just a passerby who accidentally entered this place. As long as you can tell me the way to leave this place, I will not make things difficult for you. The old man said coldly, I have to say that the lie you made up is a bit clumsy. Do you think this lie can make us let you enter the ancestral land? That's absolutely impossible. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. From the words of the old man, he could perceive that this so-called ancestral land was probably the key to entering and leaving the outside world. However, the people of the Qin Tian tribe all regarded him as a humanoid illusion god. He knew that if he did not use thunderous means, he would not be able to explain it clearly to these people. Chapter 1708. God-sealing array. Boom boom boom. The god-sealing array trembled violently, causing the ground within a few hundred miles of the array to tremble as well. This tremor was so intense that it even affected the Qin Tian tribe within the god-sealing array. The old, weak, women, and children who were originally hiding in the tiled houses all walked out in fear. What's going on? Why is this person so terrifying? He actually caused such a huge commotion in the god-sealing array. Many of the strong men in the tribe had terrified expressions as they stared fixedly at Zhuowen. A chaotic commotion once again spread out within the tribe. Even the old man, who had always had a calm expression, could no longer sit still. He shouted in a low voice, Men of the tribe, offer up the azure marks on your bodies and use them to drive away all evil. As soon as these words were spoken, the strong men in the tribe all regained their composure. Soon after, their gazes all gathered on the old man's body as they began to chant the complicated ancient language in unison. Soon after, the green patterns carved on the bodies of these strong men burst out with a dazzling green light. The light soared into the sky and converged into the god-sealing array. Oh! In an instant, the god-sealing array began to squirm violently, and its aura instantly rose. The blood-colored barrier began to squirm continuously, like a churning sea of blood. The sea of blood continued to gather, condensing into 10 blood-colored beasts that were hundreds of feet tall. The strange thing was that the 10 blood-colored beasts were all bound by blood-colored chains. As each of the blood-colored beasts moved, the crisp sound of chains touching each other could be heard. So. The moment the 10 blood-red giant beasts appeared, they split into 10 different directions and charged toward Zhuowen. The blood-red chains on the 10 blood-red giant beasts also shot out and intertwined into a huge blood-red chain net above Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as a huge pair of lightning wings unfurled on his back. He stepped on the air and instantly disappeared from his original spot, dodging the blood-colored chains. Clang clang clang. However, the 10 crimson beasts did not intend to let Zhuowen go. They roared at the sky and released their crimson chains. They were like 10 crimson pythons as they instantly sealed off Zhuowen's 10 directions. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that as the 10 chains sealed the surrounding space was also sealed. Zhuowen only felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on his body, causing his speed to instantly drop to the lowest point. At the same time, the 10 blood-colored beasts roared along the 10 chains. Countless gusts of wind whistled and instantly enveloped Zhuowen. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and pointed out a finger. 3,000 drops of yellow spring water shot out and turned into 3,000 thin yellow needles. They rustled as they shot toward the 10 blood-colored beasts. Immortal technique. Solitary peak. After executing the slaughtering underworld finger, Zhuowen took out 5,000 immortal crystals and crushed them to execute the Lone Peak Immortal technique. Immortal core power was like a shuttle as it converged into a solitary peak. This solitary peak was 50,000 feet tall, and it looked unusually vast as it lay horizontally in the air. Bang, bang, bang. Although the slaughtering yellow spring finger had stopped the 10 blood-colored beasts from charging forward, it was a pity that under the attacks of the 10 blood-colored beasts, it collapsed one after another. However, Zhuowen was neither hurried nor slow. With a roll of his sleeve, the terrifying 50,000 feet tall Lone Peak violently swept out, ruthlessly smashing into the bodies of the 10 blood-colored giant beasts, actually smashing the 10 blood-colored giant beasts, and sending them flying. The crimson chains that imprison the space around Zhuowen also revealed gaps as the blood-colored beasts were sent flying. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he leaped through the gaps and rushed towards the nearest blood-colored beast. At this moment, before the beast could react, it saw that Zhuowen had already appeared above it, holding the terrifying solitary peak of 50,000 feet in his hand and smashing it down ruthlessly. Oh! The blood-colored beast let out a sorrowful cry as it tried to raise its huge beast claws to block the solitary peak that was crushing down. However, it sadly discovered that its claws were like paper tigers under the suppression of the solitary peak. Then, it burst into a cloud of blood mist amidst its sorrowful cry. After killing the first blood-colored beast, Zhuowen immediately spread out his thunder wings. At this moment, Zhuowen activated the power of the thunder wings to the extreme. In an instant, the thunder wings spread out to a size of 1,000 feet, covering the sky and the sun. The sun and the moon dimmed as they spread out and looked as if they were covered in lightning. With one of the 10 beasts dead, their power was greatly reduced. Zhuowen relied on his unparalleled speed and the terror of the solitary peak to blast the remaining 9 beasts into a cloud of blood mist in just 10 breaths of time. The moment the 10 blood-colored beasts were annihilated, many of the strong men in the tribe spat out a mouthful of blood. The light of the green runes on their bodies became extremely dim. As for the vigorous old man, he let out a muffled groan and retreated continuously. Fortunately, there were 2 men with sharp eyes and quick hands behind him. They supported the old man and prevented him from making a fool of himself. This humanoid illusion is too powerful. Our Qin Tian tribe is finished. What should we do? Countless tribesmen of the Qin Tian tribe revealed looks of despair. The 10 beasts formed by the most powerful divine chain formation could not do anything to this person. The Qin Tian tribe was almost at their wits' end. At this moment, the 10 blood-colored beasts were annihilated, and the light on the surface of the divine chain formation was extremely dim. Zhuowen slowly walked over, looking down at the tribesmen of the Qin Tian tribe. He raised the solitary peak in his right hand and flung it violently. Kacha! The sound of glass shattering could be heard. The solitary peak smashed onto the surface of the divine chain formation, and countless cracks spread out. Then the divine chain formation finally collapsed completely. The moment the divine chain formation was destroyed, Zhuowen carried the man in animal skin and slowly landed in the Qin Tian tribe. At this moment, the tribe was as silent as cicadas in winter. All the tribesmen stared at Zhuowen with fear in their eyes. Zhuowen even saw many young children hiding behind the women, fearfully sizing up Zhuowen who had intruded into the tribe. Zhuowen inadvertently looked at the old and weak women and children hiding behind the strong men, and the indifference in his eyes eased a lot. Then his gaze fell on the frail old man not far away. He knew that this old man should be the leader of this tribe. The old man glanced at Zhuowen with fear, and then looked at the man in animal skin in Zhuowen's hand. He said in a deep voice, "Ahi, did you lead this humanoid illusion to the tribe?" At this moment, the man in animal skin had already woken up. He naturally saw everything that had happened. Plop! The man in animal skin broke free from Zhuowen, and suddenly knelt on the ground. He repeatedly kowtowed to the old man and said, "Patriarch, Ahi deserves to die." Ahi clearly didn't tell this person the location of the Qin Tian tribe. Ahi doesn't know why he found us. But Ahi knows that this has nothing to do with me. Therefore, Ahi is willing to atone with death. The man in animal skin choked with sobs. Soon after, he took out a dagger polished from rock from his trousers and swiped it at his neck. Clang! However, This action of the man in animal skin was immediately stopped by Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked around and coldly said, "I've already said that I'm not the illusion god you all speak of. I'm just a passerby who happened to pass by. If I was the illusion god, how could you all still be alive?" The old man sized up Zhuowen. After discovering that Zhuowen had intruded into the Qin Tian tribe, he unexpectedly didn't wantonly slaughter like the other illusion gods. His gaze revealed a skeptical expression. "You're really not the illusion god? If you're really not, can you let me personally examine you?" The old man said in a deep voice. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the old man. In the end he nodded and said, "Sure. Air, the two of you bring the ancestral stone over." The old man instructed the two men behind him. The two men nodded at the old man and immediately left the place. Not long later, the two of them staggered over while carrying a green rock that was about 10 feet large. "If you want to prove that you're not the illusion god, are you willing to drip a drop of blood on the ancestral stone to prove your identity?" the old man asked. Zhuowen pondered for a moment. After observing that there were no problems with the ancestral stone before him, he cut his thumb in an extremely straightforward manner. Soon after, he flicked a drop of blood onto the ancestral stone. CICICI. After the blood entered the ancestral stone, it was absorbed. Subsequently, there were no changes to the ancestral stone. Seeing that there were no changes to the ancestral stone, the old man breathed a sigh of relief and muttered in a low voice, "He really isn't the illusion god." Many of the surrounding clansmen naturally saw the phenomenon of the ancestral stone and breathed a sigh of relief one after another. "Esteemed guest, it's this old man's fault for not being observant enough and causing you such trouble." This old man was rather open-minded. Knowing that he had recognized the wrong person, he respectfully walked before Zhuowen and deeply bowed to express his apology. Of course, the reason why the old man's attitude was so humble was naturally partly because of his apology. However, the main reason was because of Zhuowen's powerful strength. Being able to break open the god sealing array by himself was definitely not something an ordinary person could do. Therefore, this person deserved his bow. "It's fine. I'm only a passerby. Right now, I only want to leave this place. I wonder if you have any ideas? I've heard you mention the ancestral grounds before. Could it be that there's a passage out of that place?" Zhuowen asked with a burning gaze. Feeling Zhuowen's burning gaze, the old man's scalp went numb. With his intelligence, he naturally guessed that the young man before him was not inferior to this world, but came from the outside world. As for the passage to the outside world, the old man had only read about it in ancient books. It was said that a very, very long time ago, they had a passage that led to the outside world, and that passage was within the ancestral grounds. However, the ancestral grounds had already become a forbidden area for the three great clans. Ordinary people would find it difficult to even take half a step in, let alone talk about leaving. The old man's hesitation caused Zhuowen's brows to slightly knit together. Just as he was about to continue speaking, suddenly, figures rushed over from outside the Qin Tian tribe. These figures moved extremely vigorously like monkeys as they rapidly approached the Qin Tian tribe. In less than 10 breaths of time, these figures had already rushed into the Qin Tian tribe. These figures were faintly divided into two factions. The leader of one of the factions was a young man wearing a leopard print vest, and the leader of the other faction was a middle-aged man with a bare upper body. When the two leaders arrived at the Qin Tian tribe, their faces were filled with panic. Chapter 1709. Humanoid illusion god, the Heavenly Cycle tribe and Heavenhold tribe have arrived. The old man revealed a puzzled expression when he saw the figures that had appeared in the Qin Tian tribe. Previously, he had mistaken Zhuowen for a humanoid illusion god. Although he had notified the upper echelons of the two tribes, he hadn't had the two tribes rush over. Moreover, even if they had rushed over, they couldn't have brought so many people with them, right? The old man glanced over and discovered that the elites of the two tribes had practically all arrived. In other words, the entire fighting strength of the two tribes had arrived. This was truly too rare. Of course, What made the old man even more puzzled was that the panic and fear in the eyes of the people of the two tribes were extremely obvious. They didn't conceal it in the slightest. The youth in the leopard print vest and the bare-chested middle-aged man hurriedly came before the old man. The middle-aged man said rather urgently, "Patriarch Miao Yi, hurry up and activate the God-sealing formation. Otherwise, we will all die here." The old man frowned slightly and asked in puzzlement, "Patriarchs and I Yong and Kong Yi, what's wrong with you too? Why are you so flustered? Also, why are you so anxious for me to activate the God-sealing formation?" The youth in the leopard print vest was the patriarch of the Heavenly Cycle tribe, Anai Yong, while the bare-chested middle-aged man was the patriarch of the Heavenhold tribe, Kong Yi. At this moment, both Anai Yong and Kong Yi were looking at the old man in astonishment. Anai Yong said, "Patriarch Miao Yi, didn't you tell us that a humanoid illusion god had appeared?" Miao Yi was taken aback. Soon after, he smiled and said, "That was a misunderstanding. The two of you didn't need to mobilize so many people." Anai Yong and Kong Yi glared at him. Anai Yong's eyes were scarlet red as he said, "What misunderstanding? Patriarch Miao Yi, our Heavenhold tribe and Heavenhold tribe have been completely occupied by the illusion gods. There have been countless casualties, and only these elites have managed to escape. Furthermore, the manifest gods that appeared this time weren't just one or two, but several hundred. Furthermore, within the several hundred manifest gods, there was even a humanoid manifest god. That humanoid manifest god was too terrifying. It actually led several hundred manifest gods to attack and occupy our two great tribes." Kong Yi also said solemnly, "That humanoid illusion god's intelligence is too high. The weaker clansmen of our two tribes were all slaughtered and devoured by it. Now that humanoid illusion god is most likely planning to come to your Qin Tian tribe for a massacre." What? Hundreds of manifest gods had appeared, and there was even a humanoid manifest god leading them. How was this possible? This is something that has never happened before. Miao Yi exclaimed in shock. Seeing Miao Yi so surprised, Anai Yong said with some displeasure, "Patriarch Miao Yi, now is not the time to be surprised. Among our three tribes, only your Qin Tian's God-sealing formation is the strongest. Whether or not we can withstand this calamity will depend on your tribe's God-sealing formation." Miao Yi's gaze was gloomy as he lightly sighed and said, "Patriarchs, I am truly sorry. Our Qin Tian tribe's God-sealing formation has already been destroyed and can no longer be used." Anai Yong and Kong Yi were immediately stunned. The two of them stared blankly at Miao Yi and asked in unison, "Your God-sealing formation has been destroyed? It was destroyed by the manifest gods?" "It was destroyed by me. In order to compensate you, this one will set up a defensive formation in the Qin Tian tribe to help you resist the manifest gods." Suddenly, a somewhat gloomy voice was heard, causing Anai Yong and Kong Yi's gazes to shift slightly and fall on Zhuowen. "Who are you? You actually dare to threaten to destroy the God-sealing formation?" Anai Yong said coldly. "Arrogant fool. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Kong Yi was even more direct. As soon as Anai Yong's voice fell, she rushed in front of Zhuowen. Azure runes continuously lit up all over her body. Soon after, her fist blasted through the air and instantly landed on Zhuowen's face. Bang! Zhuowen slowly raised his right palm and lightly caught Kong Yi's fist that carried the momentum of a rainbow. Soon after, he clenched his fist and threw Kong Yi to the side like he was throwing trash, causing Kong Yi to grimace in pain and groan. Hiss, hiss, hiss. This scene caused the clansmen of the Heavenhold and Universal Sky tribes to inhale a breath of cold air. Anai Yong's entire body trembled, and he opened his mouth but was unable to make a sound. "The two of you." The God-sealing formation was indeed destroyed by this esteemed guest. His strength is extremely terrifying. Miao Yi truly didn't know how to describe Zhuowen. In the end, he could only use the words extremely terrifying to evaluate Zhuowen. Of course, Miao Yi naturally didn't forget Zhuowen's promise from before. His gaze lit up as he stared at Zhuowen and asked, "Can you really help us obstruct the manifest gods?" Zhuowen frowned and said indifferently, "I just said that I'll do my best. I've never seen this manifest gods before, so I can't jump to conclusions." As he spoke, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and immediately summoned the 1st and 9th Yangdao swords. At the same time, he also took out the heaven-defying saint artifacts, Long River Blade and Violet Sword. The 1st, 9th Long River Blade and Violet Sword turned into 4 long rainbows that flew into the sky and stopped in the sky above the Qin-Tian tribe. On the other hand, Zhuowen took a step forward and flicked his finger. He took out a saber, a sword, a halberd, a spear, a bow, and various other saint artifacts from his ring. There were hundreds of them. Most of these saint artifacts were taken from the spirit rings of the saints he killed in the past few years. A portion of them were also taken from the Azure Dragon Hall. Of course, the grades of these saint artifacts weren't very high. Zhuowen basically didn't use them normally. However, Zhuowen cultivated the Devouring Curse restriction, which recorded a restriction formation called the 100 Saint Soldier Formation. It was quite powerful. Most importantly, the 100 Saint Soldier Formation was relatively simple to set up. It could be set up in a short amount of time. However, the 100 Saints Soldier Formation required a considerable amount of saint artifacts. Without enough saint artifacts, it would be impossible to display the might of the 100 Saints Soldier Formation. Hundreds of saint weapons flew into the air, surrounding the Qin-Tian tribe. With the 1st Yangwei Sword, 9th Yangwei Sword, Long River Blade, and Violet Sword as the core, they formed an extremely powerful formation. The people of the Qin-Tian tribe looked at the several hundred saint artifacts floating in the sky, and the 100 Saints Soldier Formation. They could clearly feel the terror of this formation. This was especially so for the tribesmen of the Qin-Tian tribe. The 100 Saints Soldier Formation's aura was even more powerful than their God-sealing formation. After all, the raw materials of this formation were extremely rare saint artifacts. This, thank you, sir. Miao Yi bowed to Zhuowen. At this moment, he had also changed the way he addressed Zhuowen. He felt it the most. This 100 Saints Soldier Formation was much more powerful than the God-sealing formation. At this moment, Kong Yu was also barely able to get up with the help of her tribesmen. She also felt the powerful aura of the 100 Saints Soldier Formation. Her face was slightly pale. She was secretly annoyed that she had attacked this young man before. And Ai Yong also stared at Zhuowen with fear in his eyes. It was truly inconceivable that the body of this seemingly weak young man actually contained such terrifying power. Whoosh! 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 Suddenly, several dozen li away from the Qin-Tian tribe, black figures rushed over. Wherever these black figures passed, the green grass on the ground would wither. At the same time, they were accompanied by strange laughter. Within the Qin-Tian tribe, Zhuowen seemed to have sensed something. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the horizon before him. He coldly said, "It seems that the illusion god you speak of has already arrived." Miao Yi and the rest followed Zhuowen's gaze. Sure enough, a rather dense black cloud was rushing over from the horizon. Upon closer inspection, there were several enormous black figures within the black cloud. It's the illusion god. There really are so many illusion gods. Are they planning to destroy all 3 of our tribes? Miao Yi sucked in a breath of cold air, and said with a trembling voice. The black cloud was extremely fast. In roughly 15 minutes, it had arrived above the Qin-Tian tribe from several dozen li away. Zhuowen's eyes were like torches. He immediately saw that the black cloud was actually formed by squirming black beasts. At a glance, there were several hundred black beasts in the black cloud. They were of various shapes and sizes, bearing their fangs and brandishing their claws. At the very front of the black cloud was a black-clothed youth. He walked over step by step, his robes fluttering in the wind. His eyes were as cold as blades. The black-clothed youth before him was no different from a human. He should be the humanoid illusion god that Miao Yi had spoken of. And those black beasts should be ordinary illusion gods. Zhuowen carefully sized up the black-clothed youth. Even he was unable to distinguish the difference between this humanoid illusion god and a human cultivator. It was no wonder that Miao Yi had confused him with the humanoid illusion god. Perhaps feeling Zhuowen's gaze, the black-clothed youth tilted his head slightly and indifferently stared at Zhuowen. His gaze, which was as cold as blades, slowly narrowed as he looked at Zhuowen. In his eyes, the aura on Zhuowen's body was incompatible with the rest of the tribe. In other words, It gave him a sense of crisis. This discovery made the black-clothed youth knit his brows and reveal a displeased expression. He didn't like this sense of crisis. Qin Tian tribe, there's no need to put up a resistance. Immediately surrender, and become food for our mighty illusion god group. If you do that, perhaps I'll let you die a quick death. Otherwise, I'll torture you to death. The black-clothed youth laughed strangely. However, the black-clothed youth's response was silence. Clearly, no one had any intention of surrendering. The black-clothed youth narrowed his eyes and indifferently said, "It seems that you intend to resist stubbornly. Then don't blame me for not giving you a chance." After saying that, the black-clothed youth waved his right hand. The countless illusion gods in the black cloud behind him swooped down and pounced on the 100 Saints soldier array. Zhuowen's mouth was full of a sneer. He pointed his right hand to the sky. Immediately, the 100 Saints soldier array emitted a series of crisp and ear-splitting sounds of weapons clashing. The hundreds of saint weapons in the 100 Saints soldier array fiercely rotated, turning into a terrifying weapon storm. The core of this weapon storm was the first Yangdao sword, the 9th Yangdao sword, the violet sword, and the long river saber. It swept out violently. Bang! 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 Chapter 1710. Yellow Spring Death Needles. With their attacks broken, the several hundred manifest gods retreated while wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. Under Zhuowen's control, the storm of weapons pursued the enemy. The humanoid illusion god coldly snorted and extended its right claw into the void. Immediately, an endless vortex surged over and turned into a huge, ferocious black claw that smashed down and slammed into the weapon storm. Bang! 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 The sound of collisions rang out continuously, and the humanoid manifest god's pupils shrank. Soon after, under the bombardment of the storm of weapons, it retreated several dozen steps. However, the storm of weapons was also defeated by the black claw. The strength of this humanoid manifest god is pretty good. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and gazed at the humanoid manifest god. On its shoulder, the water droplets of the yellow spring began to condense, finally turning into a yellow spring eye. Through the yellow spring eye, Zhuowen discovered that the bloody light of sin on the humanoid manifest god's body had reached a length of 300 meters. At a glance, it looked like a bloody azura bathed in blood. Not only the humanoid manifest god, but the several hundred strange beast manifest gods behind the humanoid manifest god were also extremely sinful. The bloody light on their bodies was at least 10 meters long, and the largest was close to 300 meters long. Looking at the terrifying bloody light on the manifest god's body, Zhuowen licked his lips, and his eyes suddenly revealed greed. This greed was like a hunter seeing his favorite prey. When the 100 Saints soldier array blocked the attack of the manifest gods, everyone in the Qin Tian tribe let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, everyone looked at Zhuowen with eyes full of reverence. Everyone was very clear about how terrifying the attack of several hundred manifest gods was. If it was the Qin Tian tribe's god-sealing array, they would have to use all of their strength to barely block that attack. However, the 100 Saints soldier array that the youth in front of them had set up so effortlessly blocked that terrifying attack. This made everyone admire Zhuowen even more. The instant everyone's gazes converged on Zhuowen, Zhuowen actually did something that everyone found unbelievable. Zhuowen leaped into the air with his right foot, directly passing through the obstruction of the 100 Saints soldier matrix in the air. He leaped into the air in an instant and walked out of the 100 Saints soldier matrix. Is he crazy? Why don't you stay in the 100 Saints soldier array? Why do you insist on leaving? Anai Yong and Kong Yi exclaimed in unison. On the other hand, Miao Ye's face was gloomy, and the entire Qin Tian tribe was in an uproar. Everyone's thoughts were similar to Anai Yong and Kong Yi's. Haha. You really have guts. You actually dared to come out. Since that's the case, I'll let you have a taste of what it's like to beg for death. The humanoid illusion god was pleasantly surprised. The 100 Saints army array really left him distressed. He knew that even if he paid an enormous price, he still might not be able to break through. Now that the person who had set up the 100 Saints soldier array had taken the initiative to come out, as long as this person was killed, the 100 Saint Soldier array would naturally collapse on its own. Since the humanoid illusion god could think of this, everyone in the array naturally could as well. This was also the reason why everyone's faces changed greatly when Zhuowen came out of the array. Unfortunately, everyone's dissuasion had no effect on Zhuowen. At this moment, Zhuowen was staring at the bloody light of sin on the bodies of the illusion gods through the yellow spring's eye, and the greed in his eyes became even more intense. The humanoid illusion god naturally saw the greed in Zhuowen's eyes. He frowned and coldly snorted. Death is at hand, yet you still dare to show such an expression. Devour this person. After saying that, the humanoid illusion god waved his hand at the several hundred illusion gods behind him. The several hundred illusion gods formed a black cloud, and suddenly formed a black storm that swept towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen sneered again and again. The 300-meter-long lightning wings unfolded, and the two great laws of space were attached to the surface of the lightning wings, causing the lightning wings' speed to reach an unprecedented level. Rumble. In just an instant, the lightning wings unfolded, and Zhuowen disappeared from where he was as fast as lightning, dodging the attacks of the several hundred illusion gods. At the same time, Zhuowen formed a seal with his right hand, took out 1,000 immortal crystals, and unleashed the immortal technique Solitary Peak. A 1,000-meter-long solitary peak appeared in the void, and soon after, it was supported by Zhuowen's right hand and fiercely smashed down. Roar! The solitary peak was like a hot knife through butter as it blasted into the countless shadows. The terrifying shadows were immediately scattered by the solitary peak, while Zhuowen took a step and instantly swept to the side of an illusion god. This illusion god had the appearance of a tiger, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. When it saw Zhuowen rushing over, the illusion god suddenly pounced on Zhuowen, as if intending to tear Zhuowen to pieces. However, Zhuowen's gaze was cold. With a point of his right finger, 1,000 underworld water droplets wrapped around the illusion god, turned into thin needles, and entered the illusion god's body. The illusion god let out a mournful cry, and under the effect of the underworld water droplets, it turned into a dried corpse, and because of this, there were 100 more underworld water droplets. Truly sinful. There are actually 100 more underworld water droplets. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and a pleasantly surprised expression appeared on his face. The number of underworld water droplets produced after the death of this illusion god far exceeded that of anyone that Zhuowen had killed before. After killing this illusion god, the void around Zhuowen collapsed, and he disappeared from where he was, dodging the attacks of the illusion gods that swept over him. With Zhuowen's speed, even if these illusion gods used all their skills, it would be difficult for them to catch up to him. Therefore, among the several hundred illusion gods, Zhuowen was like a fish in water. Almost as soon as he appeared, several illusion gods fell. As the illusion gods continued to fall, the number of underworld water droplets on Zhuowen's body also continued to increase. As the number of underworld water droplets continued to increase, the might of Zhuowen's slaughtering underworld finger also began to skyrocket, and the speed at which he killed the illusion gods also continued to increase. At this moment, if one were to raise their head to look at the sky from the Qin tribe, they would be able to see the corpses of the illusion gods falling from the sky and smashing onto the ground. Looking at the corpses of the illusion gods falling one after another, the people of the Qin tribe were speechless. At this moment, they were completely shocked. One must know that there were countless illusion gods in the sky, and every one of them was an extremely terrifying existence. Every one of them was something that their three tribes had to use all their skills to barely deal with. But now, Zhuowen was surrounded by several hundred manifest gods. Not only was he not injured in the slightest, he was even killing them one by one. How terrifying was that? After killing nearly 100 illusion gods, the number of underworld water droplets in Zhuowen's body finally reached 10,000. At this moment, Zhuowen's body was covered with underworld water droplets, which looked extremely strange. The underworld water droplets have finally reached 10,000. What kind of changes will happen to these 10,000 underworld water droplets? Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of anticipation. When the number of underworld water droplets had reached 1,000, they had condensed into a yellow spring eye. Now that it had reached 10,000, He wondered what kind of changes would occur to the underworld water droplets. The 10,000 underworld water droplets around Zhuowen's body began to surge, forming small yellow whirlpools. These whirlpools continued to condense, and in the end, they turned into a long yellow needle that was several feet long. The underworld death needle can penetrate all matter. It dares to send any living being to the underworld. A subtle message was transmitted into Zhuowen's mind, introducing the thin and long underworld death needle that had appeared in front of him. When he saw that the 10,000 underworld water droplets had only formed a long needle, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a hint of disappointment. Originally, he thought that it would form something extremely powerful, but he didn't expect that it would only condense into this ordinary-looking long needle in front of him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. While Zhuowen was in a daze, the surrounding illusion gods rushed over, opening their bloody mouths as they tried to swallow Zhuowen. Zhuowen flicked his finger, shooting out the underworld death needle that had just condensed in his hand. The underworld death needle instantly turned into a yellow rainbow, and its speed was extremely fast. Bang, bang, bang. The yellow ray of light pierced through the illusory gods that were rushing over. Soon after, the bodies of those illusory gods collapsed and turned into dried corpses before they could even react. So fast. It's actually so powerful? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and the disappointment in his eyes immediately disappeared, replaced by excitement. The underworld death needle was much more powerful than the underworld water droplets from before. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The underworld death needle was too fast. Everywhere it passed, there would be mountains of corpses and seas of blood. None of the illusion gods were lucky enough to escape, and they all became souls under the underworld death needle. Seeing this scene, the humanoid illusion god was both shocked and furious. He let out a loud roar and rushed over like a great rock spreading its wings. His right claw stretched out, grabbing at Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were calm as he pointed the sword finger of his right hand. Suddenly, the underworld death needle shot out like a rainbow, heading straight for the space between the humanoid illusion god's eyebrows. The humanoid illusion god naturally felt the sharpness of the underworld death needle. He let out a low roar and pointed the sword finger of his right hand at the void. Countless black mist gushed out, transforming into a huge black stone. Ding! The underworld death needle slammed into the black stone, and its forward momentum came to a slight halt. However, the black stone didn't stop the underworld death needle for long before collapsing. The underworld death needle whistled, and continued to rush towards the humanoid illusion god. The humanoid illusion god retreated step by step, and a trace of fear finally appeared in his eyes. The underworld death needle was too powerful, and the defense he had set up was simply useless. All of them had collapsed. Solitary peak. Zhuowen's right hand pointed at the void, and the 1,000-foot-tall solitary peak swept behind the humanoid illusion god in an instant. In an instant, the humanoid illusion god was caught in a dilemma. In front of him was the underworld death needle, and behind him was the 1,000-foot-tall solitary peak. Fight! The humanoid illusion god's eyes revealed a touch of madness. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. As soon as the essence blood appeared, it began to squirm and finally turned into a several hundred feet large bloody hand. The bloody hand directly blasted towards the underworld death needle in front of him. Wherever the hand passed, a fishy smell would burst out. It was incomparably bloody. Who knew how many creatures had died under this hand? Bang! As the bloody hand blasted over, clouds of blood mist burst out. The underworld death needle was like a hot knife through butter, piercing through the bloody hand at an extremely fast speed. In an instant, it had pierced through the bloody hand and drilled into the forehead of the humanoid illusion god. Pucci. Chapter 17:11. Ancestral Grounds. As soon as the humanoid illusion god died, 500 Yellow Springs water droplets flew out from its body and fused with the Yellow Springs death needles. The death of the humanoid illusion god caused the remaining illusion gods in the surroundings to feel fear. Those illusion gods rushed out one after another and began to flee. Unfortunately, How could Zhuowen let these illusion gods do as they wished? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Zhuowen pointed at the void with his right hand, and the void laws converged on the surface of the Yellow Spring's death needles. Instantly, the Yellow Spring's death needles escaped into the void. They were like hunters in the dark night, killing the fleeing illusion gods one by one. After all the illusion gods were killed, the number of Yellow Spring's water droplets reached 30,000, and the 30,000 Yellow Spring's water droplets condensed into 3 Yellow Spring's death needles. At this moment, the Qin Tian tribe was silent for a long time. Everyone in the tribe was staring blankly at the youth hovering in the void. The reverence that originally existed in their eyes had been completely replaced by fanaticism. There were even many tribesmen who knelt on the ground and kowtowed toward Zhuowen. The illusion gods were the calamity of their 3 great tribes, and they had been troubling their 3 great tribes for thousands of years. This time, the humanoid illusion god had led several hundred illusion gods. If it weren't for Zhuowen, their 3 great tribes would have faced the calamity of annihilation. But now, Zhuowen had saved them from the calamity of annihilation. This kindness was too great, and it was like they had given birth to a parent. How could they not kowtow and thank him? With a wave of his sleeve, Zhuowen put away the numerous saint artifacts in the 100 saint soldier array, and then slowly landed in the Qin Tian tribe. As soon as he landed, everyone led by Miao Yi and Ai Yong and Kong Yi all knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully toward Zhuowen. Among them, Miao Ye's old face was filled with excitement. He hurriedly came before Zhuowen and said, "Sir, you have eliminated the calamity of the illusion gods for our 3 great tribes. You are our great benefactor. Can you tell this little one your name?" Zhuowen stared blankly at the actions of Miao Yi and the others. He did not expect them to be so agitated. But when he thought about how extraordinary those illusion gods were, and how the strength of the tribesmen of the 3 tribes was generally lacking, killing those illusion gods was equivalent to saving the 3 tribes. It was no wonder that Miao Yi and the others were so excited. Zhuowen said calmly, "Didn't you say that if we want to leave this place, we should go to the ancestral land? Can you tell me more about the ancestral land?" Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. This place was too strange. Zhuowen was certain that this was definitely not the Central Plains. As for where exactly this place was, Zhuowen had no idea. Moreover, the reason why he was so anxious to leave was definitely related to the War of the Gods. Previously, the middle-aged man had said that the War of the Gods in the Chaos Temple would begin in about 5 years. If he missed these 5 years, wouldn't he miss the chance to save Mu Qinxue? Therefore, he absolutely could not allow such a situation to occur. Miao Ye's eyes flickered as he sighed and said, "Lord Zhua, about the ancestral land, I would like to speak with you in private." As he spoke, Miao Yi made a pleased gesture toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen did not refuse and followed Miao Yi towards the tower of the Qin Tian tribe. What surprised Zhuowen was that every time he walked past, the surrounding tribesmen of the Qin Tian tribe would kneel on the ground and kowtow towards him. They would even recite the ancient language in a low voice, their faces filled with reverence and fanaticism. At the center of the 3 tribes was a mountain peak that pierced the clouds. At the center of the countless mountain peaks was a huge black hole. Black mist surged from the surface of the black hole. Within the black mist, scarlet eyes were revealed, as if they were the eyes of ghosts in the night. Ding ding ding. Crisp footsteps slowly sounded from the black hole. As the footsteps got closer and closer, the scarlet eyes slowly dimmed, as if they were afraid of the owner of the footsteps. The black mist surged and a graceful black-robed woman walked out step by step from the black mist. Her face was covered by a black veil, and her beautiful eyes were filled with evil intent. At this moment, the black-robed woman's beautiful eyebrows were slightly knitted. She looked towards the direction of the Qin Tian tribe and said in a deep voice, "Looks like Heisher is already dead. He brought hundreds of illusion gods out, but he actually died. What a waste." However, Her Majesty said that an unknown intruder had appeared here. I'm afraid that the intruder was the one who killed Heisher. With Her Majesty's character, she should have led an army to eliminate the intruder after Heisher was killed. However, Her Majesty swallowed her anger. Just as the black-robed woman finished speaking, footsteps sounded from behind her. A black-robed man with a feminine face slowly walked over. The strange thing was that the black-robed man was actually walking like a cat. His posture was like that of a charming woman, but his face was the face of a real man. This strange behavior formed an extremely strong contrast with this man. The new queen's personality is indeed a little strange. If it was the previous queen, she would have eliminated the intruder long ago. It's a pity that the previous queen has died of old age, the feminine man said indifferently. The black-robed woman glanced at the feminine man and said coldly, "The smoke whale contains a small world, but it fell into a deep sleep 10,000 years ago because of Tsangjia. It is the duty of every queen to maintain the smoke whale's existence. The former queen was already very powerful. After all, she persisted for 1,000 years." The feminine man shrugged and said, "I naturally know about this. Since the former queen chose the current queen, she should have her reasons. However, I don't really like the current queen." Just as the feminine man finished speaking, a zither sound suddenly sounded. Then, a black sound wave, like ripples in the water, quickly spread and wrapped the feminine man in an instant. The feminine man's face changed slightly. He clenched his hands, and a slender black finger knife suddenly appeared in his hands. He suddenly rotated and blasted on the black sound wave. Puff! Unfortunately, the black finger knife collapsed instantly, and the feminine man's hands burst into clouds of blood mist. He screamed and flew directly to the ground not far away, twitching all over. The black-robed woman's face changed greatly. She hurriedly retreated dozens of steps. Her beautiful eyes stared at the depths of the black hole, and she hurriedly said respectfully, "Your Majesty." As soon as she said that, the black fog in the depths of the black hole began to twist and squirm. A graceful and hot figure slowly walked out of the black fog. This figure was dressed in a black veil and wore a black and white circular mask. A pair of beautiful eyes stared indifferently at the feminine man who was twitching not far away through the mask. "Your Majesty, I dare not talk nonsense anymore. Please spare my life, Your Majesty." The feminine man ignored his twitching hands and hurriedly knelt on the ground, kowtowing repeatedly. His voice was trembling. "For nether emissaries, although you are humanoid illusions cultivated by the former queen, you have to remember that the former queen is already a thing of the past. I am the real queen now. If any one of you is still unconvinced, you can come and find me." The woman slowly opened her mouth. Her voice was clear like an oriole, and it was exceptionally pleasant to hear. However, her words were filled with coldness. "Yes, yes, yes. Your Majesty, I dare not do it again. I dare not do it again." The feminine man's entire body trembled as he begged for mercy. "Take him away. Don't embarrass me anymore," the queen said indifferently. The black-robed woman didn't dare to say anything. She cupped her fists and brought the feminine man away. Soon, they disappeared into the black hole. When the two of them disappeared into the black hole, the queen waved her jade-like hand, and the ink-black mist wriggled in front of her. Soon after, it transformed into an image, and this image was actually that of Zhuowen and Miao Yi, who had entered the tower of the Qintian tribe. The queen's beautiful eyes stared straight at Zhuowen, as if she was stunned. After a long while, she sighed and muttered to herself, "I really don't know if he and I are really fated. I originally thought that it would be very difficult for me to see him in this life, but he was actually able to break into this place." After saying that, the queen gave Zhuowen a deep look, and then slowly entered the black hole. Inside the tower, Zhuowen and Miao Yi sat opposite each other. Miao Yi respectfully poured a cup of tea for Zhuowen. Zhuowen gently took a sip, then looked straight at Miao Yi and said, "Can you tell me about the ancestral land?" Miao Yi nodded and said in a deep voice, "The ancestral land is a place that our three tribes have guarded for generations. As for what is inside the ancestral land, this old man actually doesn't know. However, this old man once read in the ancient books of our ancestors that the ancestral land seems to be related to the so-called outside world. Originally, this old man didn't care much about the so-called outside world, but ever since Sir appeared in my Qintian tribe, this old man began to believe that the so-called outside world really exists. In other words, the ancestral land is actually connected to the outside world." Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, but he wasn't happy. He keenly noticed that when Miao Yi mentioned the ancestral land, a hint of fear and dread flashed through his eyes. Is there a problem with the ancestral land? Zhuowen asked indifferently. Miao Yi sighed softly and said, there is indeed a problem, and a big one at that. In fact, the phantom god was born from the ancestral land, but as for why the phantom god appeared in the ancestral land, it has always been a mystery to our three tribes. A long time ago, when the phantom god first appeared in the ancestral land, it did cause some trouble for our tribes, but it wasn't a big problem. After all, the number of phantom gods was extremely small. At that time, the patriarchs of the three tribes were able to enter the ancestral land, but as time passed, the number of phantom gods increased and even began to threaten the three tribes. Moreover, we don't know when it started, but after the patriarchs of the three tribes entered the ancestral land, they never came out again. Moreover, this situation occurred with every patriarch. Later on, we suspected that it was the phantom god's doing, so to this day, no one from the three tribes has entered the ancestral land. Chapter 17:12. Layer 10. Zhuowen frowned slightly. From what Miao Yi had said, the number of illusion gods in the ancestral land should be extremely high, probably far exceeding several hundred. Are there a lot of humanoid illusion gods? Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. Miao Yi shook his head and said, humanoid illusion gods are extremely rare. In so many years, this old man has only seen one twice. Zhuowen nodded. Humanoid illusion gods were too intelligent, and could command other illusion gods. The threat they posed wasn't small. If that humanoid illusion god had come with thousands of illusion gods, even Zhuowen wouldn't have been able to resist them so easily. However, the question before Zhuowen was how many illusion gods were there in the ancestral land? After all, Miao Yi had never entered the ancestral land, and didn't know the exact situation inside. Take me to the ancestral land. Zhuowen decided to enter the ancestral land to investigate. Miao Yi was shocked when he heard this. He stared at Zhuowen and said in a trembling voice, Sir, you can't enter the ancestral land so easily. The patriarchs of our three tribes are the most typical examples. The ancestral land is the nest of the illusion gods. It's very dangerous. Zhuowen waved his hand and said, if you don't dare to go, you can tell me the location of the ancestral land. I'll go take a look myself. Seeing how stubborn Zhuowen was, Miao Yi's eyes flickered. He gritted his teeth and said, all right, this old man will risk his life to accompany Sir to the ancestral land. But before that, I hope Sir can help this old man repair the God Sealing Array in the tribe. If you have the prototype of the God Sealing Array, it won't be difficult to repair it, Zhuowen said indifferently. Thank you, sir, Miao Yi said energetically. In the next few days, Zhuowen basically stayed in the Qin Tian tribe to help Miao Yi repair the God Sealing Array. Because Zhuowen had mastered the Devouring Curse, his understanding of restrictions wasn't something an ordinary arcana master could compare to. So, after seeing the prototype of the God Sealing Array, he quickly repaired the Qin Tian tribe's God Sealing Array. After the God Sealing Array was repaired, everyone in the Qin Tian tribe felt even more reverence for Zhuowen. Let's go. Zhuowen glanced at Miao Yi. With a wave of his sleeve, Saint Energy swept out and swept Miao Yi up. He then turned into a long rainbow and instantly disappeared from the Qin Tian tribe. Under Miao Yi's guidance, the two of them quickly arrived at the mountain range in the middle of the three great tribes. After passing through one mountain after another, Zhuowen finally brought Miao Yi to the center of the countless mountain peaks. There was a large flat area there, but this area was occupied by a huge black hole. Inside the black hole, there was an endless amount of fog. The moment Zhuowen flew into the air, pairs of scarlet eyes opened within the churning mist, coldly staring at Zhuowen. This is the ancestral land. Miao Yi's body trembled as he felt the scarlet gazes directed at him from below. His heart was filled with fear. Leave this place first. Zhuowen nodded slightly at Miao Yi. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, a gust of wind brought Miao Yi away from this place. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After Zhuowen sent Miao Yi away, The pairs of scarlet eyes in the black hole suddenly erupted with terrifying killing intent. Soon after, strange beasts rushed out of the mist with earth-shattering roars. They were densely packed and extremely terrifying. They are all illusion gods. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. In just an instant, there were already nearly 100 illusion gods that rushed out. Moreover, Zhuowen could sense that there were still many illusion gods below the black hole. The instant the illusion gods rushed out, Zhuowen displayed his lightning wings. 30,000 Yellow Springs water droplets condensed into 3 Yellow Springs death needles that revolved around his body. At this moment, Zhuowen didn't plan to meet these manifest gods head-on. Instead, the 300-meter-long lightning wings suddenly closed and wrapped around Zhuowen, forming a round egg that was covered in lightning. Whoosh! The void and explosive steps technique lingered on the surface of the round egg. Soon after, the round egg ignored the countless illusion gods that rushed out from below and fiercely fell into the depths of the black hole. Sweeping up an endless violent wind, the 3 Yellow Springs death needles were like the most loyal guards. As the lightning egg fell into the depths of the black hole, all those that dared to obstruct it were annihilated by the needles. The lightning egg's speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it broke through the obstruction of the illusion gods and entered the black mist before continuing to descend. Zhuowen, who was wrapped in the lightning wings, could naturally see the surroundings through them. He was surprised to find that the black hole was divided into layers. Moreover, the more layers he went down, the more illusion gods would appear. When Zhuowen appeared on the 9th layer, the number of illusion gods had already reached several thousand. With so many illusion gods densely covering the 9th layer, the speed of Zhuowen's descent was greatly reduced. In the corner of the 9th layer, a black-robed woman emerged from the black mist. Her pair of beautiful eyes coldly stared at the lightning egg wrapped in lightning wings. "Intruder, you actually dare to trespass into the forbidden area. Your courage is too big." After the black-robed woman finished speaking, she took a step and swept into the air. With a pinch of her jade-like hand, the dozens of illusion gods in the surroundings suddenly screamed and burst into black energy, which transformed into a sharp black arrow in the black-robed woman's hand. The black-robed woman's left hand pinched, and a curved bow appeared. She knocked the black arrow and pulled it into a full moon shape. With a bang, the black arrow left the bowstring. Like a ghost in the night, it instantly swept towards the lightning egg's surface. Boom, 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 boom. Continuous sounds of collisions resounded. Shortly after, the black arrow bombarded the lightning egg's surface and erupted with monstrous lightning. The lightning egg's entire body trembled, and the speed of its descent slowed down once again. The black-robed woman coldly snorted. Unexpectedly, she instantly took out 3 arrows and knocked the bow into a full moon shape. The 3 arrows instantly swept out and landed on the lightning egg's surface. Soon after, countless lightning liquid burst out, and the lightning egg actually came to a complete stop. As soon as the lightning egg came to a stop, countless illusion gods in the surroundings madly pounced, as if they wanted to tear the lightning egg into pieces. Rumble! The lightning wings fiercely unfolded, and an endless sea of lightning spread out. The illusion gods that were pouncing in the surroundings were all sent flying by the enormous sea of lightning. However, there were even more illusion gods behind them that didn't care about their lives as they rushed towards Zhuowen, who was within the lightning wings. Buddha kowtows 9 times to the heavens, the 5th kowtow to the heavens. Zhuowen didn't hesitate to use the Buddha demon eye. Instantly, 5 indomitable Buddha phantoms appeared and bowed towards the heavens as a terrifying pressure came crushing down. The instant the pressure came into contact with the countless illusion gods that were rushing over, their bodies seemed to have been frozen in place. A chilling light flashed through Zhuowen's eyes. With a stomp of his right foot, he instantly broke away from the encirclement of the illusion gods. At the same time, he immediately noticed that at the end of the 9th floor, there stood a huge white stone door that was spotlessly white and flawless. In such a dark and gloomy 9th floor, the sudden appearance of such a spotlessly white stone door was truly out of place. The instant he saw the white stone door, Zhuowen took a step with his right foot, and like a shuttle, he instantly rushed towards the white stone door. However, the instant he was about to approach the white stone door, the black-robed woman appeared in front of Zhuowen, as if she had teleported. With a stretch of her jade-like hand, the several hundred illusion gods around her instantly collapsed, turning into terrifying black flames that rushed toward Zhuowen. Sensing the terrifying black flames, Zhuowen's pupils slightly shrank. He suddenly took out the first Yangdao sword and ninth Yangdao sword, and like two blazing suns, they blocked in front of him. Bang, bang, bang. As the black flames rushed over, they bombarded the two blazing suns. Soon after, a series of explosions rang out. The two were actually equally matched. The black-robed woman also noticed this. She bit the tip of her tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood essence onto the black flames in front of her. Soon after, countless black vortexes appeared on the surface of the black flames. The black vortexes contained a terrifying suction force. Under the suction force, the remaining large number of illusion gods in the surroundings actually rushed into the black flames one after another, becoming a part of the black flames. As the illusion gods continued to converge into the black flames also became more and more terrifying. In the end, they turned into an incomparably huge black flame beast. In an instant, the two blazing suns formed by the first Yangdao sword and ninth Yangdao sword were completely shattered into nothingness under the attack of the black flame beast. Zhuowen let out a muffled groan and retreated several hundred steps. He immediately pointed out the devouring curse seal in his right hand, and took out the violet sword, long river blade, and spirit-devouring lava river. He had set up a pentagonal formation. 5 powerful saint artifacts were placed together in a profound pattern, forming an extremely terrifying defense. It barely managed to block the black flame beast. However, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with dread. He looked deeply at the white stone door behind the black-robed woman. He knew that the white stone door was probably the entrance to the 10th floor. But why was the 10th floor so different from the previous 9 floors? The other 9 floors didn't have any doors, but the 10th floor had a white stone door. Could it be that the 10th floor contained some kind of secret that couldn't be revealed to others? However, after seeing the terrifying black flame beast before him, Zhuowen no longer persisted. Instead, he used the pentagram formation as a shield and suddenly retreated towards the top of the black hole. His speed was extremely fast, as if he had teleported. When Zhuowen had completely retreated from the black hole, the black-robed woman stood above the black flame beast. She did not continue to pursue him. She muttered in a low voice, "I really don't know what the queen is thinking. It's such a good opportunity to kill this intruder," but she let him go just like that. The black-robed woman faintly sighed. Soon after, the black flame beast beneath her exploded, turning into illusion gods that constantly roamed the 9th floor. After escaping from the black hole, Zhuowen directly rushed to the Qintian tribe. His face was pale. He gave Miao Yi some instructions before entering the tower to cultivate. Looks like the ancestral land is really too dangerous. Even the Lord was injured because of it. Miao Yi sighed softly. He became even more fearful of the ancestral land. Chapter 17:13. Substituting the plum for the peach. Thinking of the numerous illusion gods on the 9th floor, Zhuowen felt somewhat bitter. What gave Zhuowen an even bigger headache was the black-robed woman. Without a doubt, this woman was a humanoid illusion god. Moreover, this black-robed woman was even stronger than the humanoid illusion god that Zhuowen had killed in the Qintian tribe. Most importantly, this black-robed woman could use the power of the illusion gods. The black flames that erupted from her were too terrifying. And the more illusion gods there were, the greater the might of the black flames. Within the black hole, the black-robed woman undoubtedly had the advantage. If it was a one-on-one fight, the black-robed woman really wouldn't be Zhuowen's opponent. But with the terrifying number of illusion gods within the black hole, the black-robed woman firmly suppressed Zhuowen. Of course, if Zhuowen used the self-detonation of his soul, even if the black-robed woman had the advantage of time and place, she would still suffer grievances. However, the problem now was that there was only one primordial spirit left in Zhuowen's body. Lei Qingtian's primordial spirit had already been used to deal with the man with the grimace mask. The remaining primordial spirit was Zhuowen's strongest trump card. Naturally, Zhuowen would not waste it here. Although there are many illusion gods within the black hole, the massacre yellow spring in your body is extremely effective against them. Moreover, due to the enormous amount of sins on the illusion gods, the massacre yellow spring will have an undeniable advantage in accumulating yellow spring water droplets. Xiao Hei's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Be that as it may, my personal strength is limited, and the number of illusion gods in the black hole is extremely high. Moreover, there are also humanoid illusion gods commanding them. I'm afraid that my plan to capture and kill illusion gods won't be easy to carry out, Zhuowen said in a deep voice. Xiao Hei was silent for a moment, and then suddenly said, the threshold for the massacre yellow spring finger is very low. If you pass the massacre yellow spring finger to the tribesmen here, and have them help you collect yellow spring water droplets to nurture the massacre yellow spring finger, you may be able to use this method to deal with the illusion gods within the black hole. Zhuowen's eyes lit up and he couldn't help but smile. You're absolutely right. If this method works, then the tribesmen can indeed deal with illusion gods. Moreover, they can also accumulate yellow spring water droplets. It's absolutely killing two birds with one stone. However, before that, I have to test whether the tribesmen here can cultivate the massacre yellow spring finger. Speaking up to here, Zhuowen transmitted a message. Soon after, Miao Yi respectfully entered Zhuowen's room and asked, My lord, may I know what matter you ordered me to come here? Do you want to learn this technique? Zhuowen didn't waste any time. With a wave of his sleeve, the yellow spring death needles flew out and revolved around his body like a yellow rainbow. Miao Yi's body trembled as a hint of excitement appeared in his eyes. He naturally recognized the yellow spring death needles that were lingering around Zhuowen. Back then, Zhuowen had relied on the yellow spring death needles to kill a humanoid illusion. It was extremely terrifying. This lowly one wants to learn, Miao Yi said with a trembling voice. This Zhuowen will give you and your tribe a fortune. This fortune is this technique. With this technique, your tribe will have the possibility of killing illusion gods. Do you really want to learn it? Zhuowen asked again. Yes. Miao Yi immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Zhuowen. Zhuowen nodded and continued. How many people do you have in your tribe? Our Qin Tian tribe has a total of 800 strong men. Due to the heavy losses of the Heavenly Cycle tribe and Heavenhold tribe, there are 300 and 400 respectively. In total, there are 1,500. Miao Yi honestly replied. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out 1,500 yellow spring water droplets, fused them into a yellow ball, and handed it to Miao Yi. This technique is called the slaughtering yellow spring finger. It contains 1,500 yellow spring water droplets. These yellow spring water droplets contain the cultivation method of the slaughtering yellow spring finger. You only need to fuse one yellow spring water droplet to fully comprehend this technique. However, the power of this technique is very weak at the beginning. As the number of yellow spring water droplets increases, its power will become stronger and stronger. If you want to increase the number of yellow spring water droplets, you will have to kill illusion gods and plunder their sins to condense even more yellow spring water droplets. Speaking till here, Zhuowen took out another 100 yellow spring water droplets. Shortly after, with a point of his sword finger, the 100 yellow spring water droplets entered Zhuowen's forehead under his control. These yellow spring water droplets had been specially refined by Zhuowen. They would not absorb essence energy, but become a medium to contain the slaughtering yellow spring finger, as well as the yellow spring water droplets. With these yellow spring water droplets that had been specially refined by Zhuowen, the people in the tribe would be able to easily grasp the slaughtering yellow spring finger. Moreover, they would also have the ability to kill illusion gods and increase the number of yellow spring water droplets. Moreover, Zhuowen had another purpose in putting the yellow spring water droplets into the bodies of the people in the tribe. That was to make all of the yellow spring water droplets under his control. No matter how large the amount of yellow spring water droplets in the bodies of the people in the tribe was, even if it surpassed Zhuowen's, as long as Zhuowen willed it, These yellow spring water droplets would leave their bodies and converge into his body. It could be said that Zhuowen's method was similar to free-range breeding. He, Zhuowen, only needed to impart the refined yellow spring water droplets to the people in the tribe. Then he did not need to care about them. In order to strengthen themselves, the people in the tribe would also hunt illusion gods. After all, now that the black hole had been stirred up by Zhuowen, illusion gods would frequently rush out and harass the Qin Tian tribe. If the Qin Tian tribe did not have the god-sealing formation, their end would have been far from good. However, this slaughtering yellow spring finger could give the tribe hope to resist the illusion gods. Miao Yi closed his eyes and silently comprehended the cultivation method of the slaughtering yellow spring finger, contained within the yellow spring water droplets. Roughly half a day later, he suddenly opened his eyes and knelt on the ground in extreme excitement, bowing towards Zhuowen from afar. Miao Yi thanks Sir on behalf of the entire tribe for your selfless gift. After truly comprehending the cultivation method of the slaughtering yellow spring finger, Miao Yi was able to experience the power of the slaughtering yellow spring finger. He also saw the hope within the slaughtering yellow spring finger that caused him to surge with excitement. Go. Pass down this slaughtering yellow spring finger. Then in the future, your tribe will no longer fear the illusion gods. Instead, the illusion gods should fear you, Zhuowen said indifferently. Miao Yi bowed once more and slowly retreated with excitement in his heart. After Miao Yi retreated, Zhuowen's eyes flickered. With a wave of his sleeve, he summoned a sorry figure from the Azure Dragon Hall. As soon as the figure appeared, it was lying on the ground, constantly struggling and twisting as if it was trying to break free from something. Zhuowen stared at the figure with a trace of a sigh in his eyes. This figure was none other than the man with the devil mask that Zhuowen had captured back then. At this moment, the mask on the man's face had already shattered, revealing a rather handsome and dry face. Why is it you, Jianmu? Zhuowen said with a light sigh. The man with the devil mask who had chased Zhuowen into an extremely sorry state and almost killed Zhuowen was none other than Jianmu, who was also a genius of the Divine Institute in the Eastern Lands. Later on, Jianmu followed the mysterious Yang Yi and left the Eastern Lands for the Central Lands. The two had been separated for more than 10 years. Meeting again this time in such a way really made Zhuowen sigh. Of course, what surprised Zhuowen even more was that Jianmu's cultivation base had advanced too quickly. It hadn't been long, but he had already reached the peak of the earthly immortal realm. This was really too terrifying. What happened to Jianmu during this period of time? From the looks of it, he doesn't seem to recognize me at all. Zhuowen quietly stared at the struggling Jianmu. He found that Jianmu's gaze was extremely cold, as if there was no emotion in his eyes, only numbness. At this moment, Jianmu was surrounded by countless runes. Even Jianmu's Dantian and nascent spirit had been sealed by Zhuowen's devouring curse. There were no less than thousands of runes and seals. If Jianmu hadn't been seriously injured by the explosion of the earthly immortal's origin spirit, even if Zhuowen placed thousands of seals in Jianmu's origin spirit, it would probably be useless. Moreover, Zhuowen found that the origin spirit in Jianmu's body was extremely strange. The origin spirit's aura was completely different from Jianmu's. It even gave Zhuowen an extremely unfamiliar and cold feeling. At this moment, Xiaohei suddenly flashed out from between Zhuowen's eyebrows and arrived in front of Jianmu. Its little claw reached into Jianmu's dantian, and its gaze immediately became cold. As expected, no wonder Jianmu's cultivation base advanced so quickly and reached the peak of the earthly immortal realm in an instant. It turns out that someone used an insidious method on him, Xiaohei said coldly. Zhuowen frowned slightly and looked at Xiaohei with a puzzled expression. Xiaohei didn't continue to beat around the bush and said, "This origin spirit wasn't cultivated by Jianmu. Instead, someone used an extremely sinister secret technique to forcibly place the origin spirit of another person into Jianmu's dantian. If I'm not wrong, Jianmu's cultivation base should only be at the profound sage realm at that time. The saint force in his body was completely extracted, and when the saint force in his dantian was completely emptied, this origin spirit was placed into his dantian. Moreover, this origin spirit has no consciousness. It should be controlled by someone." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said, Then what about Jianmu's consciousness? I'm afraid that the real Jianmu's consciousness has already been concealed. The person who performed the technique must have taken a fancy to Jianmu's sword cultivator body, and the origin spirit in Jianmu's body is the origin spirit of another sword cultivator. It can be said that this body is a puppet. It has no consciousness and can only be controlled by others, Xiaohei said in a deep voice. Zhuowen took a deep breath, and his eyes became even more gloomy. He finally knew why Jianmu had become the masked man, and was chasing after him. He also finally knew why Jianmu's cultivation base had advanced so quickly and reached the peak of the earthly immortal realm in an instant. It turned out that there was such a reason behind all of this. Who is it? Who would use such a sinister method on Jianmu? Zhuowen's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and his whole body was filled with murderous intent. I'm afraid it's the masked man who framed you. Jianmu's current state is definitely related to that person, Xiaohei said coldly. Chapter 1714. Proof. Is there no way for Jianmu to recover? Zhuowen looked at Jianmu who was struggling and asked with a sigh. Xiaohei's eyes flickered, and she said in a deep voice, "It's not that there's no way. Jianmu's dantian has been completely extracted. He should have died, but because of this strange soul, Jianmu is not dead, but he's like a living dead. Jianmu's sea of consciousness is intact, but because the soul in his dantian is too powerful, it's suppressing Jianmu's sea of consciousness, causing his sea of consciousness to be in a state of deep sleep." Zhuowen frowned slightly and said, "What you're saying is that if we can suppress the soul, then Jianmu's sea of consciousness will awaken." Xiaohei shook her head, and she tapped Jianmu's forehead with her little claw. Soul suppression is one aspect. Another aspect is that Jianmu's sea of consciousness is actually sealed by a force. All we can do is suppress the soul in Jianmu's body. As for whether he can wake up, it's all up to him. Zhuowen nodded, made a hand seal with his right hand, and used the devouring curse seal again. He fused seals and began to seal the soul in Jianmu's dantian. It took Zhuowen 10 days to seal the soul with the devouring curse seal. During these 10 days, Zhuowen formed 100,000 seals to completely seal the soul in Jianmu's dantian, and also completely isolated the soul's influence on Jianmu's sea of consciousness. 10 days later, Zhuowen's face was pale as he lightly wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. His gaze was like a torch as he stared at Jianmu before him and said in a deep voice, "Jianmu, whether you can awaken or not will depend on yourself." With that, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and took Jianmu into the Azure Dragon Hall, and let Long Tian in the Azure Dragon Hall take good care of Jianmu. Long Tian's cultivation base had made great progress, and he had now reached the Yin Sky Saint stage. When Zhuowen absorbed the immortal qi, he also deliberately let a part of the immortal qi into the Azure Dragon Hall for Long Tian to absorb. This was also the reason why Long Tian's cultivation base had improved so quickly. Back then, Jianmu followed Yang Yi into Central Region, and Jianmu became a puppet-like existence. What about Yang Yi? What happened to him? Zhuowen couldn't help thinking of Yang Yi's figure. There was no doubt that Yang Yi was very mysterious, and of course, very powerful. Even now, when Zhuowen thought about it, the strength that Yang Yi had displayed back then was still shocking. Given Zhuowen's current strength, he knew that Yang Yi's strength back then was definitely at the immortal saint realm. As for what Yang Yi's was, he couldn't tell. Now that something like this had happened to Jianmu, Yang Yi was probably involved as well. Of course, with Zhuowen's understanding of Yang Yi, he didn't think that the mastermind was Yang Yi. After all, Yang Yi had helped him a lot in the past, and he was also good to Jianmu. He wouldn't harm Jianmu. After going out this time, in addition to the Battle of Gods, I still need to find Yang Yi. Everything is fishy. If I can find Yang Yi, everything will come to light. Zhuowen muttered to himself. In Zhuowen's sea of consciousness, Xiaohei reminded, "If you really meet Yang Yi, you still need to be careful. You still don't know whether Yang Yi is good or evil." Zhuowen nodded. Although Yang Yi had indeed helped him a lot in the past, he still had to be wary of others. It was better to be cautious. "We can only talk about this after we leave this place." Next, let's see if the people of Qin Tian tribe can cultivate the massacre finger of Yellow Spring, Zhuowen said indifferently. When Zhuowen walked out of the tower, he immediately attracted the attention of many tribesmen. They all respectfully knelt before Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were calm as he walked through the tribe. Soon, he saw Miao Yi teaching the tribesmen how to use the massacre finger of Yellow Spring in a spacious open space. At this moment, Miao Yi was surrounded by many strong men of the tribe. They were all looking at Miao Yi with hope. Miao Yi pointed his right hand at the void. Immediately, 100 drops of Yellow Spring water flew out and condensed at the tip of his finger. Then he pointed his finger forward. The void in front of him suddenly distorted, and a phantom of the Yellow Spring appeared behind Miao Yi. It looked very powerful, causing everyone to cheer. Even Enai Yong and Kong Yi revealed a look of longing and shock. There was no doubt that the destructive power of the massacre finger of Yellow Spring was much stronger than the attack methods they had studied. Of course, when they found out that the massacre finger of Yellow Spring was used by Zhuowen to instantly kill hundreds of manifest gods, the strong men of the tribe were even more eager to learn the massacre finger of Yellow Spring and increase its power. Patriarch Miao Yi, will the massacre finger of Yellow Spring really increase its power after killing a manifest god? I've never heard of or seen such a technique before. I'm really doubtful. Of course, there were also people who raised their doubts. It was really hard to believe that a technique that could increase one's power after killing a manifest god. Miao Yi glared at them and said, "Do you dare to doubt His Excellency's words? If it wasn't for His Excellency, our tribe would have been annihilated. How could he possibly deceive us on this matter?" Miao Yi had just spoken half of his words when he saw Zhuowen walking towards them. He promptly walked out from the crowd and knelt in front of Zhuowen saying, "This old man didn't know that His Excellency had graced us with his presence. His Excellency, please forgive me." The others followed Miao Yi and knelt on the ground. Ever since Zhuowen had repelled the manifest gods and saved the tribe, he had become the symbol of the tribe. Everyone revered him. Enai Yong and Kong Yi were also willing to kneel on the ground. Has everyone in the tribe cultivated the massacre finger of Yellow Spring? Zhuowen looked around and asked casually. The moment he looked around, he discovered that there were only a few people cultivating the massacre finger of Yellow Spring. After all, he was the one who had refined the Yellow Spring water droplet. He could sense the Yellow Spring water droplet's aura, but most of the strong men in the surroundings didn't have the Yellow Spring water droplet's aura. Miao Yi was a little embarrassed as he braced himself and said, "My Excellency, please give me a little more time. I will definitely have everyone in the tribe cultivate the massacre finger of Yellow Spring." Zhuowen shook his head. He discovered that only Miao Yi, Enai Yong, Kong Yi, and a few dozen others had the aura of the massacre finger of Yellow Spring. It seems that some people don't really believe in the power of the massacre finger of Yellow Spring. Since that's the case, I need to make an exception for these people, Zhuowen inwardly thought. He casually called out the dozen or so people who had cultivated the massacre finger of Yellow Spring. With a wave of his sleeve, 100 Yellow Spring water droplets flew out and poured into the bodies of the dozen or so people. When the 100 Yellow Spring water droplets entered their bodies, the dozen or so people immediately felt that the massacre finger of Yellow Spring in their bodies had become much stronger. "You dozen or so people, follow me out of the tribe." Zhuowen pointed at Miao Yi and the dozen or so people who had cultivated the massacre finger of Yellow Spring. Shortly after, they led the dozen or so people out of the tribe. Zhuowen's actions immediately attracted the attention of many people in the tribe. Many people were watching from within the high walls of the tribe. Many people were puzzled by Zhuowen's actions. Today, I will let you all prove that this technique has the power to kill a manifest god. Moreover, it can increase the power of this technique by killing a manifest god. As he spoke, Zhuowen immediately disappeared from where he stood. When he reappeared, he was holding 10 strange beasts in his hands. "It's a manifest god." Seeing the manifest gods in Zhuowen's hands, many people in the tribe revealed expressions of fear. Miao Yi and the dozen or so people who were standing in front of the tribe also revealed expressions of fear. Their tribe had been invaded by manifest gods for thousands of years, and the fear of manifest gods had taken up most of their hearts. When they saw a manifest god, the first thing they thought of was to run away, not to resist. Zhuowen's right hand pulled out a manifest god, and his right palm fiercely slammed into the manifest god. The manifest god immediately let out a wail, and became incomparably weak. Soon after, Zhuowen unceremoniously threw the extremely weak manifest god in front of the dozen or so people led by Miao Yi and coldly said, "Kill this manifest god." The dozen or so people's eyes revealed fear. Only Miao Yi looked at Zhuowen and summoned his courage to slowly approach the manifest god. Seeing Miao Yi take the lead, Zhuowen nodded his head in appreciation. When Miao Yi was finally within a few meters of the illusion god fiercely roared at Miao Yi with a sinister expression. However, its injuries were too heavy and it was simply unable to get up. It could only stare blankly as Miao Yi approached it. "Use the slaughtering yellow springs finger to kill this manifest god," Zhuowen said indifferently. Miao Yi took a deep breath and loudly shouted. He pointed his finger, and his right finger seemed to be gilded as it fiercely slammed into the manifest god's head. Immediately, 100 yellow springs water droplets flowed from Miao Yi's fingertip and entered the manifest god's body. In just a few breaths of time, the manifest god struggled a few times before completely turning into a dried corpse. The yellow springs water droplets in Miao Yi's body also increased by 100, reaching a total of 200 droplets. The increase in yellow springs water droplets also caused Miao Yi's strength to increase imperceptibly. Both his strength and speed had increased by a lot compared to before. This discovery made Miao Yi go wild with joy, and he was extremely excited about cultivating the slaughtering yellow springs finger. The instant Miao Yi used the slaughtering yellow springs finger to kill the manifest god, it also thoroughly shocked many people in the tribe. They had never thought that such a powerful existence like the manifest god could be killed by a single person in their tribe. After all, in the past, in order to encircle and annihilate a single manifest god, it had taken hundreds and thousands of people to barely kill it. If you don't want to become stronger, I will take back the slaughtering yellow springs finger in your body and let you continue to be as ordinary as before. If you want to become stronger, then you have to overcome the fear in your heart and challenge the things that you previously thought were impossible to defeat. Zhuowen's voice was very cold, and it echoed in everyone's ears like thunder. These words were not only spoken to the dozen or so people present, but also to the entire tribe. Continue. Zhuowen once again released a manifest god. This manifest god was also heavily injured, but it could still move with difficulty. Chapter 17:15. Ali. The dozen or so people worked together, especially Miao Yi, who had absorbed the yellow springs water droplets. He fought especially hard, and his strength far surpassed the others. After half an incense stick's worth of time, the heavily injured manifest god let out a wail and turned into a dried corpse. The yellow springs water droplets that came from the manifest god poured into the bodies of the dozen or so people. With the increase in yellow springs water droplets, the dozen or so people could clearly feel their strength increasing. This made them extremely excited, and the fear they had for the manifest god lessened by a lot. Zhuowen's hands didn't stop moving. With another wave of his hand, he brought out the third heavily injured manifest god. After tasting the sweetness, the dozen or so people were no longer afraid. Instead, they were like hungry wolves as they pounced forward and attacked the manifest god with the yellow springs finger. This time, the dozen or so people's cooperation was extremely good, and they quickly killed the manifest god. Next, Zhuowen released manifest gods one after another, and the dozen or so people's strength increased by a lot with the increase in yellow springs water droplets. The 10th is a complete manifest god. Kill it. Zhuowen released the 10th manifest god, but he didn't seriously injure it. Instead, he released it in perfect condition. As soon as the 10th manifest god appeared, it rushed towards Miao Yi's group with bloodthirsty ferocity, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Although Miao Yi and the others were a little nervous, they were more excited. After killing 9 manifest gods in a row, the fear they had for the manifest gods had already faded by a lot. Go! Miao Yi let out a low roar as hundreds of yellow springs water droplets revolved around him. He rushed forward without any fear, and the others followed behind him with tacit understanding. Bang! 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 The Manifest God and Miao Ye's group immediately engaged in a fierce battle. Bestial roars and angry shouts continuously resounded as terrifying gales swept up in the surroundings. After half an incense stick's worth of time, the Manifest God let out a sorrowful cry as it was besieged by the dozen or so people. Miao Yi and the others were gasping for breath, and their complexions were pale. However, their eyes shone with unprecedented brilliance. Miao Yi abruptly knelt down in front of Zhuowen. Behind him, Enai Yong Kong Yi and the others also knelt down, saying in unison, "Thank you, Lord, for bestowing this technique to our tribe." The people who were originally watching from within the tribe also fell into silence. However, there were even more people who revealed looks of regret. Miao Yi and the rest were able to cleanly kill the Manifest God, who would normally require hundreds or thousands of people to subdue, with just a dozen or so people. In their eyes, this was something completely inconceivable. But now Miao Yi and the others had done it. And the reason why they were able to do so was because they didn't believe in the slaughtering finger of the underworld before. Zhuowen nodded. After which, he turned to the Qin Tian tribe and said, "Whether you want to remain the same or become a supreme expert, everything is up to you. I, Zhuowen, will not force anyone." After saying that, Zhuowen turned into a long rainbow and rushed into the tower. He was very clear that now that he had completely displayed the might of the slaughtering finger of the underworld, even if he didn't say anything, the entire tribe would begin to learn the slaughtering finger of the underworld. Sure enough, not long after Zhuowen entered the tower, an uproar immediately arose in the tribe. Many robust men began to ingratiatingly escort Miao Yi and the others into the tribe. Their goal was naturally to learn the slaughtering finger of the underworld from them. Miao Yi was very meticulous. He recorded down all the tribesmen who wanted to learn the slaughtering finger of the underworld, and then took out the underworld water droplets that Zhuowen had given him before, and placed them between the tribesmen's eyebrows. The underworld water droplets that Zhuowen had refined contained the essence of the slaughtering finger of the underworld. Moreover, the threshold was extremely low. As long as one wasn't an idiot, they would be able to learn the slaughtering finger of the underworld. However, the difficult part was accumulating the underworld water droplets, which required killing. Only by continuously killing Manifest gods could they continuously increase their strength. Slowly, all the robust men in the tribe learned the slaughtering finger of the underworld. Man's desire was endless, but it was precisely because of this desire that people began to pursue it. When the robust men in the tribe learned the slaughtering finger of the underworld, the majority of them thirsted for even greater strength, thirsting for slaughter. As a result, the tribe began to form teams of slaughtering gods. Everyone formed teams of 10 or 20 people, and began to leave the tribe in search of Manifest gods. At this moment, the tribesmen no longer feared the Manifest gods. Instead, they treated them as prey and began to hunt them down. In the beginning, the tribesmen had just begun to cultivate the slaughtering finger of the underworld, so it was inevitable that there would be casualties. However, as the number of killings gradually increased, the tribesmen's casualties also greatly decreased. The underworld water droplets that began to appear in many people's bodies rapidly increased as they continued to kill. Just like this, a year passed. During this year, the Qin Tian tribe had undergone great changes. Not only did the robust men cultivate the slaughtering finger of the underworld, but even the elderly, women, and children in the tribe learned the slaughtering finger of the underworld. It could be said that the slaughtering finger of the underworld had already become the foundation of the entire Qin Tian tribe. All the tribesmen had to cultivate the slaughtering finger of the underworld. During this year, a few extremely powerful geniuses emerged in the tribe, and the most representative of them was a youth named Alai. This Alai had no parents in the tribe and had been alone since childhood. If it weren't for the assistance of some neighbors, Alai might not have lived past the age of 10. However, ever since Alai cultivated the slaughtering finger of the underworld, he followed the elders in the tribe and killed Manifest gods like a madman. At that time, Alai was only 12 years old. It could be said that Alai was extremely desperate. Every time he went out to hunt manifest gods, he would bear the brunt of their attacks. He would never cower and completely disregard life and death, because he thirsted for power more than anyone else. Of course, due to Alai's unfortunate childhood, his personality was extremely reclusive and difficult to get close to. He was cold and emotionless to others, and this was also the reason why very few people would befriend him. However, Alai was extremely respectful towards Zhuowen, the benefactor who bestowed the slaughtering finger of the underworld to the tribe. Every day when he went out to hunt, he would respectfully kowtow 3 times in front of Zhuowen's tower before leaving. This was because it was precisely Zhuowen's slaughtering finger of the underworld that had completely changed his fate. In the past, he was merely a weak orphan without the strength to truss a chicken, and was often looked down upon by others. However, the slaughtering finger of the underworld allowed him to undergo a transformation. All of this was bestowed upon him by Zhuowen, and he was very grateful in his heart. On this day, as usual, Alai arrived in front of the tower, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed 3 times. He took a deep look at the tower, his gaze filled with fanaticism and reverence. "Alai, are you going out to hunt manifest gods again today?" A voice filled with vicissitudes of life suddenly sounded, and Miao Yi slowly walked out, followed by Inai Yong and Kong Yi. Miao Yi gazed at the indifferent Alai before him, his brows creasing slightly as he said, "In the past year, our tribe has hunted enough manifest gods. Nearly all of the manifest gods within a radius of several tens of thousands of li have been hunted down by our tribe. Our tribe has already achieved a state of tranquility and peace, so there is no need for you to go out and hunt manifest gods every day. After all, it is very difficult for you to find a manifest god within a radius of several tens of thousands of li." Alai nodded, and said indifferently, "Rest assured, Patriarch, Alai is only going out to take a look." After saying this, Alai turned around and left the tribe. Wherever Alai passed, many tribesmen would look at him with reverence in their eyes, and one after another, they would make way for him, not daring to get too close to him. Looking at Alai's departing figure, Miao Ye's brows creased tightly, while Inai Yong and Kong Yi's complexions were indeed not very good. Alai is really too arrogant. Although he is the only expert in our tribe who has condensed the Yellow Spring Death Needle, he is really too arrogant to look down on the Patriarch's authority like this, Inai Yong said with a cold snort. Miao Yi shook his head and said, "Young people are, after all, quite arrogant. Moreover, Alai's talent is indeed great, and his willpower is firm. In a short year, he was able to accumulate 10,000 Yellow Spring water droplets and condense the Yellow Spring Death Needle. He is much stronger than the 3 of us." Speaking up to here, Miao Ye's gaze was rather complicated. He could be said to be the first person to obtain the Yellow Spring water droplets, and he also had the most Yellow Spring water droplets. But unknowingly, he had been surpassed by Alai before his eyes. The number of Yellow Spring water droplets in Miao Ye's body had already reached 9,000, and he was only 1,000 away from 10,000. However, Alai was 1 step ahead of him in condensing the Yellow Spring Death Needle. Miao Yi couldn't help but admire Alai from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, at the center of the countless mountain peaks, there was a deep and endless black hole. In the depths of the black hole, black mist surged, and 3 figures appeared. 2 of them were the black-robed woman who had appeared before, and the feminine man who had been taught a lesson by the queen. The other person was also wearing a black robe. He was in his middle years, and his eyes emitted a black radiance. His body emitted an incomparably imposing aura. This year, there have been great changes in the tribes in the outside world. Those tribe ants that were originally as cowardly as mice have actually started to organize and hunt the illusion gods. The middle-aged man's gaze flickered with a cold glint. The black-robed woman's long, shapely eyebrows slightly creased, and said, "The reason why there have been such great changes in the tribes in the outside world is most likely related to that intruder. At that time, I had advised the queen to thoroughly eliminate that person. Unfortunately, the queen did not listen to me. That intruder is indeed a scourge, and must be eradicated. Also, those people from the tribes outside are merely livestock raised by us, the illusion god. They actually dared to hunt and kill us, the illusion god. They are truly courting death." The feminine man coldly snorted. Chapter 17:16. Resistance. After the middle-aged man finished speaking, his eyes narrowed as a terrifying aura erupted from his body. "What's wrong?" the black-robed woman asked in surprise. The middle-aged man grinned and said, "There's a reckless little fellow that has trespassed into the vicinity of this forbidden area. Profound cultivator, go capture that little fellow for me." The feminine man was startled. He looked around as if he had discovered something. He laughed strangely and said, "Hee, no problem at all." After saying that, the feminine man took a step forward and instantly disappeared. "Heaven, should we attack the Qingtian tribe now?" the black-robed woman asked the middle-aged man. "There's no time to lose," the middle-aged man said coldly. "Go to the black hole and make preparations. This time, we brought out 5,000 illusion gods. That intruder must die." The black-robed woman revealed a surprised expression. However, she did not object to the middle-aged man's decision. She nodded and entered the depths of the black hole. Ali walked between the mountain peaks. His eyes were full of vigilance. Around him, a few feet-long yellow spring death needle revolved continuously. In the past year, the tribe has developed too quickly. Within a circumference of 10,000 miles, there isn't a single illusion god. Speaking up to here, Ali clenched his fists. His eyes were blazing. "I need to become stronger, much stronger. Since there isn't one within 10,000 kilometers of the tribe, I'll come to the forbidden grounds to find one." "Hee. Little guy, you've got guts to actually come here. Are you here to kill the illusion god?" Suddenly an ambiguous voice came. Ali jumped up and looked around. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He was very nervous. He couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It was as if the voice was coming from all directions. Whoosh! A black shadow pounced on Ali from behind. The black shadow stretched out its right hand, and 5 sharp claws extended out. The claws were several feet long, and they pierced towards Ali's back. A bad premonition arose in Ali's heart. With a low roar, the yellow spring death needles circling around him screeched, blocking his back. Ding! A crisp sound suddenly rang out. Then, Ali suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The yellow spring death needle actually trembled nonstop and showed signs of cracking. This discovery caused Ali's mind to be shaken. There was only one thought in his mind, that he had encountered the legendary human form illusion god. Run! Without the slightest hesitation, Ali immediately fled. Humanoid illusion gods were not something he could resist at the moment. The feminine man chuckled and leisurely followed behind Ali. His eyes were filled with ridicule. At the same time, he would occasionally swipe his right claw and launch an attack, causing Ali to exhaust himself to use the yellow spring death needle to deal with the feminine man's attacks. But every time he dealt with the feminine man's attack, Ali would spit out a mouthful of blood, his face as pale as snow, and his entire body would tremble. At this moment, Zhuowen, who was originally sitting cross-legged in the tower, suddenly opened his eyes. He used the yellow spring water droplets to sense that a tribesman who practiced the slaughter finger of the yellow spring was in a precarious situation. If it was an ordinary tribesman, Zhuowen would not be too concerned. But this tribesman in a precarious situation contained 10,000 yellow spring water droplets, which would be of great help to Zhuowen. Once this person died, these 10,000 yellow spring water droplets would be wasted. Speaking until here, Zhuowen stepped out of the tower, turned into a rainbow, and instantly disappeared from the tribe. "Sir, why did you go out today?" Miao Yi looked up at the sky, watching the rainbow disappear into the horizon, and could not help but mutter in a low voice, "Pucci." At that moment, within the dense forest, Ali suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. He flew backwards and smashed into numerous trees. His expression was dispirited and his face was pale. The yellow spring death needles that revolved around him had already become extremely dim. "How boring. I originally wanted to play with you a little longer, but I didn't expect you to die so quickly. Since that's the case, you can go die first." The feminine man coldly stared at Ali, who was on the verge of death, with a trace of impatience in his eyes. Shortly after, his right hand blasted out, and immediately, countless wisps of black chi formed a huge black claw that shot towards Ali. Seeing the approaching black claw, Alai's eyes were filled with despair, but he was extremely unwilling to accept this. He had worked so hard to cultivate to such a level, but he was going to die because of this. He was truly unwilling to accept this. But in the face of the feminine man's terrifying strength, his heart was filled with bitterness. At this moment, in front of the feminine man, he was like an insignificant ant. I'm still too weak. Alai smiled bitterly as he muttered to himself. Bang! However, the moment the black claw came down, 3 rainbows flew over and instantly pierced through the black claw. Then, the 3 rainbows continued to fly towards the feminine man without losing any momentum. The feminine man narrowed his eyes and waved his sleeve. Countless wisps of black chi burst out, forming black chains that entangled the 3 rainbows. After being entangled by the black chains, the 3 rainbows immediately froze. Only then did the feminine man realize that the 3 rainbows were actually the yellow spring death needles. The moment Alai saw the 3 yellow spring death needles, his eyes instantly revealed an undetectable light. There was even a trace of fanaticism in his eyes. He knew that the existence had appeared. 3 needles are not enough. Break. The feminine man coldly snorted and clenched his right hand. The chains that entangled the yellow spring death needles began to shrink, as if they wanted to crush the yellow spring death needles into powder. 3 needles are not enough? A cold voice rang out. Shortly after, 5 more yellow spring death needles flew over from afar and instantly bombarded the black chains. The black chains immediately collapsed. The feminine man's pupils shrank, and he quickly retreated. The pressure from the 8 yellow spring death needles was too great. He formed a seal with his right hand. Rolling black chi rushed out from his sleeve and finally erupted into a terrifying giant black beast. However, the giant black beast did not last long under the 8 yellow spring death needles, and was shattered into powder. However, the feminine man used this little bit of time to quickly escape. Unfortunately, the feminine man did not manage to escape for long before his path was blocked by 2 long swords that emitted blazing suns. With a muffled groan, the feminine man was forced back a few steps by the 2 long swords. The 8 yellow spring death needles were extremely fast and pierced through the feminine man. The feminine man's eyes widened and completely turned into a dried corpse. Then he heavily smashed onto the ground. As soon as the feminine man died, a figure slowly stepped out from the void and landed not far from Alai. The 8 yellow spring death needles circled around his body. The 1st and 9th Yangdao swords also flew to his side like the most loyal guards. Alai looked at the godlike figure in front of him, and the fanaticism in his eyes became even more intense. Then, ignoring his injuries, he suddenly knelt on the ground and emotionally said, "Thank you, sir, for saving my life." Zhuan nodded. He stared at the yellow spring death needle beside Alai and said indifferently, "To be able to condense the yellow spring death needle, you're not bad. You should go back now. I'm afraid this place will not be peaceful." Receiving Zhuan's praise, Alai was so excited that his body trembled. He kowtowed 3 times and silently retreated. After killing the feminine man, Zhuan obtained 2,000 yellow spring water droplets. This feminine man's strength was a little stronger than the humanoid phantom that appeared in the Qin Tian tribe. However, he was a little weaker than the black-robed woman. Originally, Zhuan only had 3 yellow spring death needles. However, in the past year, the Qin Tian tribe had developed too quickly. Everyone had been killing phantoms, and had accumulated a lot of yellow spring water droplets. Miaoyi was also quite a person. Every once in a while, he would give Zhuan half of the yellow spring water droplets that the tribe had obtained. Although Zhuan had basically been in seclusion for the past year, relying on the tribe's tribute, his yellow spring water droplets had increased day by day. Now he had accumulated more than 80,000 yellow spring water droplets. Rumble. Suddenly, a strand of black mist suddenly shot into the sky from the area that was surrounded by countless mountains ahead, and it formed into a black and terrifying tornado pillar. Numerous savage beasts and illusions flashed out from within the black pillar like raindrops, and it was an extremely magnificent and terrifying sight. It seems that something has happened in the ancestral land. Zhuan narrowed his eyes. He didn't enter the ancestral land alone. but instead cautiously returned to the Qin tribe. After Zhuowen returned to the tribe, Miao Yi asked with an alarmed expression, "Sir, what happened in the ancestral land?" Zhuowen shook his head and said, "I'm not clear about this matter. Let's wait and see." The black pillar that had soared into the sky from the ancestral land suddenly exploded and collapsed. Then, the people of the Qin tribe were shocked to discover that countless phantoms had emerged from the black pillar, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they rushed over. In front of the countless phantoms, two humanoid phantoms were rapidly approaching. Phantoms are attacking. How can there be so many? There are at least several thousand phantoms, right? Moreover, there are two humanoid phantoms. Seeing the countless phantoms rushing over, the people of the Qin tribe immediately fell into panic. Soon after, everyone's gazes fell on Zhuowen. Zhuowen leapt into the sky above the tribe. He calmly gazed at the manifest gods that covered the sky and earth as they rushed over, and said indifferently, "These manifest gods treat you as food, as livestock that they raise in captivity. Don't tell me you're going to continue like this? Could it be that you don't want to change? Don't you want to fight for your own destiny? If you don't want to, you can retreat and continue to be the livestock that you used to be. If there is anyone who wants to fight for your destiny with me, then those who are willing to sacrifice their lives, step forward now." Although these words were indifferent, they resounded like thunder in the ears of everyone in the tribe. The originally panicked people suddenly calmed down. Right at this moment, their hearts were unprecedentedly tranquil. A person's life is not to follow the will of the heavens, but to defy the heavens and control their own destiny. I, Miao Yi, am not willing to continue to be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. I am willing to follow Sir in defying the heavens and resisting the phantoms. Miao Yi stood up, his eyes full of determination. Alai is willing. Alai was the second to stand up. And Ai Yong is willing. Kong Yi is willing. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.